All right. Hope everyone is doing well. I, I like talking to people. It revives me, it gets my juices flowing. So I feel like I'm a bit addicted to doing these. If you want more, I would definitely recommend going to my Substack. We do a lot more there. There's a lot more going on, but these are fun, and I get to meet some other people who I don't otherwise interact with. So anyway, there's actually an interesting point someone made on my Substack members call that I'll just start with this just to get the conversation flowing. Um, so Chris Christie said this. Donald Trump has all but said it. He actually, at his speech in Bedminster, New Jersey, after his arraignment for his latest indictment and accusations and all that stuff, he said, I know the deep state. I know who they are, and we're going to have a new special prosecutor of our own." And he's basically implying that he's going to take them out. And he actually said that he's going to take out Joe Biden, the Biden crime family, and there were chants of "lock him up," which were heard. I think those could only be taken as a bit ironic after the "lock her up" chants that accompanied Donald Trump throughout his 2016 campaign. They actually could be heard at the RNC. I remember that because I was there. I was there in the audience in Cleveland, Ohio. It was quite fun. And Michael Flynn led a chant of "lock her up" and all that kind of stuff. And that was one of those times when I felt like almost anything could happen. That for good and for ill, Trump was a world-changing force. Also, Trump has advertised himself to his followers as your revenge, in effect. I think he used, "I am your retribution." So he said this at CPAC a few months ago. He said, "I am your warrior." He didn't quite say "I'm your leader." He said, "I'm your warrior. And I am your guardian. I'm standing between you and the deep state. The deep state wants you, but I'm in the way." We've heard that many times. And he also said, "If you've been harmed, then I am your retribution." So he is leaning in to this notion, which I think was very powerful in 2016. And Michael Moore really got at it in a famous speech he gave, where he said, "Look at me. I got laid off 4 years ago, and I haven't had a job since. I'm divorced, and my kids are in another state. Life sucks." And all I know is that the bastards who fired me and the bastards who seem to think I'm not good enough, they hate Donald Trump. So what am I going to do? I'm going to elect this bastard president to get back at all the bastards. That retribution, revenge, vindictiveness, even a little bit of nihilism, that kind of big F you to the world, or at least the people who succeed in the world, that was a part of the Trump administration. And I think Donald Trump is consciously evoking these things, whether he does it on instinct alone, which might be the case, or whether it's cultivated, is an interesting question. He might very well do it on instinct. I think he operates like that. So we were talking about this on our Substack members call, and actually an astute observer said, I was saying, if Trump gets in there, it's just going to be a revenge tour, and he's going to, publicly execute Anderson Cooper or something. Now, I don't think he's actually going to do that, of course, but making a point with hyperbole. And this astute observer said something which I think is probably true, which is that, past is precedent. The past is prologue. you can see how he acted in office to learn something about him and to predict how he's going to act. He's the same person. Now, maybe you could say he's been just totally changed by his experience. That's also a fair point. But I think this critic of mine, I guess, was getting at something, which is that we know how Donald Trump acts. And even though he is a bully and a brawler, within that persona, there's this little boy who secretly needs to be loved or something like that. And all of the problems of the administration were his attempting to reach out to these people who formerly hated him. In fact, the whole kind of always Trump crowd, it's not entirely like this, but the always Trump or only Trump crowd includes many people who were pretty seriously against him at the beginning. I mean, Lindsey Graham says that, for electing this guy, he's going to destroy the Republican Party and we'll have deserved it. He's a racist, fascist buffoon, of some criticism like that. He then takes in Lindsey Graham, John Bolton, and all those guys. He brings them into the administration. Michelle Malkin, who became the Groyper mommy in 2019 or thereabouts, was a huge critic of Donald Trump as a liberal and not part of the Tea Party and all these kinds of things that we kind of forget about now because time has passed, water under the bridge. So I know it's kind of almost unbelievable to think because Trump does evoke just visceral fear among liberals. But past his prologue, I think he'll probably do it again if he ever gets to be in office. Anyway, just a thought. So if you want to talk, we can talk about anything. Just make a request and I will bring you on. We can talk about the matter I just put forward, or we can talk about really anything else. Okay, I will go first to the guy with the alien, homegoy.f.
Oh, dude,
How are you doing?
you know what ETH is?
No, what is it?
Ethereum.
Ethereum. Okay. So you're going to sell us all Bitcoin?
No, no, no.
Good.
I was actually just in a space kind of just talking about um gematria. We were also talking about the
All right. Ace, you are up. What do you have to say?
Hey, what's up, Richard? Going off of what you're saying about kind of the evolution of some of the former MAGA, now I guess dissident right would be the label now.
Yeah.
It reminded me of if you go on, maybe not right now, but in the past few years or so, like Rod Dreher would just be draped all over the American Conservative magazine. That was like their main representative, cover to cover.
Yeah.
And I know you used to write for them, from what I understand. And obviously, there's a very different shift from whenever that was 2010-ish to now. Like now, Rod Dreher is like,
Well, yeah.
but like,
Where is Rod Dreher right now in his evolution? I'm
I think
curious. I don't read him.
he's just Orthodox Christian is the pitch.
So is he pro-Russia?
I actually don't know for sure. Xbox Live might have
Okay.
the take on that.
Oh, good. Yeah. Xbox Live is in the audience. You can come up if you're
I
willing. Yeah, Rod Dreher was kind of funny. Because I know the whole trajectory. So Rod Dreher by birth is a evangelical Christian of some kind. And I again, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm getting any details right, but this is how I've seen it. And then he converted to Catholicism and I believe was offended by the the pederasty, child abuse scandals within the Catholic Church, and then converted to Orthodox Christianity. You know, I don't know. It kind of seems like he's floating around, grasping at something. Obviously, the child abuse scandal is a real thing, but it just kind of strikes me as unserious, to be honest. And his first book was, one of these books that they produce. It's like a collection of blog posts and just these like little fun books that was called Crunchy Cons. And this was a thing back in 2010-ish. Because I was in graduate school in 2007, 2008, and we can talk about that experience. It's actually pretty interesting. And then I got a job offer from the American Conservative magazine because, and the funny thing about that is that I gave a short little presentation to a small kind of insider conservative group in DC, and Scott McConnell was there, and Scott McConnell and I talked afterward. And it was on the Duke lacrosse case, and which you guys might remember from that era. It was, gosh, I'm reminiscing here, but I think this will probably be interesting to people. It was this gang rape accusation against I think the entire Duke lacrosse team, or at least most of them. And they had hired strippers, as undergraduate jocks are what to do. And everything kind of didn't work out. It became a very uncomfortable situation. I actually do think this is real. I think this has been corroborated. Someone dropped an N-bomb at some point. That's obviously not a criminal thing, but I think it kind of shows that the whole thing had just gone south. And the woman whose name I'm forgetting accused them all of gang rape. And there was actually another stripper, and she was a African-American woman. And another stripper, I believe, was a half Asian, half African-American woman. And she kind of sort of went along with it at the beginning, but then it just got so out of hand. I think she had a pang of conscience or something and didn't go along with it. But there was this character named Mike Nifong, and he was almost, granted it was in the 2000s, but he was almost like a caricature of the Southern politician. Like you would expect him to wear a seersucker suit. He had the look, kind of looks like a pastor or something like this, and kind of greasy. And he was race baiting, as you can imagine, because it's Duke. There's a kind of white quality, white arrogant. The University of Harvard, and what did the jokes? I'm forgetting them now. It's like the Harvard of the South, or the University of New Jersey in North Carolina. That's probably the more accurate one. But anyway, he was playing up the race element, no doubt. But beyond any racial aspect of the whole story, he was just hamming for the cameras and doing all these like reenactments. And he was on cable news, which was big at the time, just every night talking to these people, and it was an absolute witch hunt. Anyway, I did a presentation. I wrote an article on the faculty response, and the faculty response, I don't even need to explain it to you. It was hysterical in nature. And they would even make comments like this. Now I'm paraphrasing, but I'm really not exaggerating. They would be like, regardless of the facts of the case, the gang rape occurred. It was pretty outrageous stuff. And so I went after my own faculty members, which is, of course, not a very good idea if you want to ingratiate yourself with them. But it was brave, and it caused a major stir. And Scott McConnell. So there was another guy who worked at the magazine, and he was mad that they were publishing Steve Saylor. So he thought that was a little too edgy, the HBD and race stuff. And so he left and kind of denounced them all and all this kind of stuff. And so there was an opening, and I had just written an article. Scott McConnell kind of, I don't know, he kind of gave me this entree, and I took it, and I guess the rest was history. I do like Scott McConnell personally, and he's an interesting guy. And that led to Talkies Magazine, because they felt that I was too edgy for the magazine, because I was just too, I don't know, I think I offended them in lots of different ways. I was certainly into like HBD stuff. I had no problem with Steve Saylor, to say the least of it. But anyway, they kind of like pushed me out, but then gave me like the softest landing ever. So they got me a job at Talkies Magazine, because they were like, this guy, he's fit for Talkies Magazine, and we want to be kind of like nice paleos and whatever. And so it was kind of like a firing / we got you a job. It's kind of an interesting thing. Anyway, Rod Dreher was kind of coming onto the scene around that time. And I actually think Rod Dreher was probably like much more what they were looking for. That whole idea of like a crunchy con, we go to Whole Foods and we, donate to NPR and buy organic goods, and, but we're also Orthodox Christians. This whole like goofy nonsense certainly was much more what they're going after than obviously what I'm going after, but not that I'm against.
Is the Whole Foods an essential part of that?
It kind of was, in the sense of like that was kind of how he was defining himself. Like, isn't it crazy that I think one of the lines from that book was like, we got strange looks at the Whole Foods organic grocery when we had an NPR tote bag, or no, excuse me, an NR, a National Review. So it was like this fish out of water story of walking into Whole Foods with an NR tote bag. But don't you see, these things are totally connected. Like, to be a true conservative is to support organic farming. Anyway, I'm actually, even though I'm kind of depicting it in a silly manner, I'm not even against that kind of stuff, to be honest. I just find it kind of lifestyle and superficial. And so Rod Dreher kind of like became big there. He was blogging there. I think that was probably the main reason why people were going to the website, was to read his blogs. And kind of that was also the blogging era. It was kind of like the Andrew Sullivan type thing, where you basically have a Twitter feed. And, Andrew Sullivan his blogs would get tons of hits. And he was basically tweeting. I mean, he would do one-line post and all this kind of stuff. And it was very popular. Andrew Sullivan, God, I'm really reminiscing here, but it's worth it. Andrew Sullivan's kind of a fascinating figure, because he came onto the scene as a war blogger. So he got his start post 9/11 in the really pretty still early days of the internet, really pre-social media. Blogging was weird, certainly not something that your parents would understand or something. And he was doing war blogging. So he was super in favor of the Iraq War and pretty much anything at that time. And then, as Andrew Sullivan's wont to do, I mean, I think Andrew Sullivan's a pretty smart guy, and he seems like a cool guy. I would want to talk to or something. But he also just kind of floats around. He'll jump on this, jump on that. He'll be this hyper Bush partisan, and then he'll turn on the war in like 2005 or something, and then be pro Barack Obama, and then be pro populism. And he just, anyway, there just seems to be a kind of like trend quality to him. He's like a barometer of fairly elite opinion, upper middle class opinion. In that sense, he's useful. But what was I saying here? So anyway, Rod Dreher was a lot like Andrew Sullivan. It was just that kind of cheap and easy blogging. Like, I can't do that. Whenever I write something, there's so many times I'll start writing something and it will just get too deep, and I can't write just like a basic bitch opinion on something. Twitter kind of keeps me. Twitter's better for me in that sense, that you can just you're confined and it's ephemeral and things like that. But anyway, Rod Dreher was kind of like the right-wing Andrew Sullivan, or the right-wing Matthew Iglesias, who also came out of that era. And then I think he started to get more kind of I don't know if serious is the right word, but at least he had he was more committed to just being an outright paleo con. And he wrote this book on like the Benedict option, about how we've totally lost the culture, and so we should go out into the woods and build monasteries and all this kind of stuff. Xbox, do you want to chime in on old Rod Dreher, because this is kind of more in your bailiwick?
Sure, yeah. So my dad actually has been a big time Rod Dreher fan for like decades. And I don't pay that much attention to Dreher. I did email him once asking him about orthodoxy, and he got back to me. And I think it was like basically what you said. He didn't really have any theological advice about things to check out. He basically just said, "Oh, I left Catholicism because of the pedophile scandal and everything." I do think that he fits into this mold of like, there's a certain type of oftentimes like traditionalist Catholic or traditionalist conservative with oftentimes are like Anglo-Catholic types. But their conservatism is like entirely aesthetic. They're really interested in kind of like reading G.K. Chesterton and LARPing as though it's 1910. So like Dreher, his blog posts, at least in like the mid 2000s, a lot of them were about like gay pride and trans stuff. And I think that's kind of pushed him to the right in the last few years. He just has all these like horror stories about parents losing custody of their kids because of trans, whatever.
Right.
But a lot of it is just about like how bad modern art and architecture are, which like they are, but like he's just kind of fixated on these sorts of culture war issues. They're not really like, I don't even know if you call them culture war issues, but kind of like arts and aesthetics. So
and just kind of reactionary and nostalgic on some level. It's like, look at this building in the 19th century or something.
Right. A lot of it is like side by side. There's like a Twitter account like this. I'm forgetting what its name is, but it's like on the left hand, they'll have like some European city street or like an American downtown in 1910. And then they'll have the like post-war, like butchered version of it on the right. And then just like return to tradition. And that's kind of what like 90% of Dreher's posts were like, at least for a long time. I haven't paid attention to him for a couple of years.
But of course, I feel like I'm going retroactive here. Of course, if you brought up any issue of race or immigration or something, he'd start like freaking out and complaining that you're a modernist.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna add in there is that there was a period where he kind of placed himself as sort of a gatekeeper, a vanguard leader of sorts. But it was really bizarre and kind of fascinating because what he would do is he'd drum up. It was around the time that his book came out, "Live Not by Lies," and he'd drum up all this sort of like kinetic energy, and then put himself in a place where he would have to sort of like come up against his actual ideological enemies, right? After being in this sort of back to tank of just a firm support, but then he would like freak out because like he would never, hold his positions against like, your average sort of like mainstream, like sort of Sharonda black woman Christian or something. Like he could never do it, but he would constantly continue and go back to that same place and relive the same cycle. You know what I mean? Like he forgot that he's a coward in a sense every single time. It's really fascinating. You know what I mean? But yeah, now I think that's why you just don't kind of hear from him because everyone's sort of clocked onto that sort of circle of events.
Yeah, I do think he's a coward because it's just kind of like fluffy nonsense at some level. It's like I remember I did this podcast one time about and I did it with this guy who went by the name Hannibal Bateman, who kind of has a hilarious pseudonym, obviously a pseudonym. And we were talking about there's this debate on Catholic social teaching and things like that. So it's in a weird way. Well, it's weird for me to be commenting on this, and it's even weirder for me to take the position of the arch Catholic. But it was a debate with the what is his name, Vermeulen, the guy at
Adrian
Harvard,
Vermeule.
who's right. And Rod was like going against this. I think what he was going against was, I think the debate. You can correct me here, Xbox. It's been a few years, but I did read up on it before I commented. But Vermeulen was making kind of a hardcore, almost statement, like almost questioning the status of the nation state itself. And maybe he's mellowed on this point, but he's basically saying that the church should have dominion on these matters. And Rod Dreher was like, well, the church has a spiritual mission, and we can't really, it shouldn't make comments on this. And I was just like, look, I am not a Catholic, so I am simply addressing this from like the consistency and seriousness of your argument. You clearly don't have the courage of your convictions in a way that Vermeulen does. Because at some point the rubber hits the road. At some point, someone has the ability to put you into jail for a crime. At some point, someone is able to declare what is right or wrong. Someone is sovereign. And you apparently don't want the church to be that way. You like it, someone's going to make that decision about what is criminally immoral and what is not. And someone will say, we have the ability and right and justification in punishing you. And you're just throwing that off to the secular nation state. So you ultimately don't have the courage of your convictions. All this Benedict option stuff is just a bunch of LARPy nonsense. If you're serious about what you're talking about, you would go that far. And so it's just this kind of like, well, I just want my, my orthodoxy to be a little lifestyle thing, And I just found that just very cowardly and dishonest and just someone I can't respect, to be honest.
Yeah, I had just a comment on this. I don't know if you remember, this is several years ago. So one of Adrian Vermeulen's lackeys, Sohrab Ahmari, if you're familiar with him.
Oh yeah, he's written some really bad books. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a complete moron. But like he's actually much like Vermeulen, like a recent convert to Catholicism, I think. But he was like trashing David French on Twitter for months, and also like whatever site he writes for. He was talking about how terrible David French is and how David French is the perfect example of kind of conservative cowardice defending Drag Queen Story Hour, which, I mean, that's like true. David French is awful. But they finally had...
But he's almost consistent about it,
Well, he's consistent in applying his, terrible kind of fusionist, libertarian, conservative politics today. But if you check David French, like from 2015, he was a lot more conservative. George Will's the same way. With George Will in the 90s, by our standards today, would look like a fascist or whatever. And now George Will is like a never Trumper, like center right Romney guy. But French and Ahmari had an in-person debate a few years ago. And like in the in-person debate, Ahmari just folded. He just like conceded almost everything to French, and he was totally kind of passive and docile. And I think the consensus is that French probably won the debate because Ahmari, much like Vermeulen and Patrick Deneen and all these other radical right, anti-modern figures, like don't have the courage of their convictions. And it is kind of like a lifestyle boutique radicalism where like they don't actually have to challenge any of the shibboleths that are truly controversial. They pick these other issues that they can be very radical on, to acquire clout, but they render themselves totally non-threatening. So like John Milbank is the kind of left-wing version of this, but they offered all these like radical critiques of modernity. They were like, William Ockham or Duns Scotus ruined everything, and we have to return to 13th century ways of thinking about politics. But the conclusions are either just like total political quietism. They're like, oh, the state is a modern post-Westphalian invention, so we need a different form of politics, a different way of looking at politics. And like that doesn't obviously we're living under a modern nation state system or something resembling it. So that's politically a dead end. Or they just reinforce kind of standard liberal cliches. Like I think I'm allowed to say his name on Twitter. E. Michael Jones, if you're familiar with him, he's like a total like lunatic. He's an example of like a genuinely, I guess you would say, like far right Catholic in some sense. Most of his controversies have to do with him going off on Jews. And I think it's fair to say that by conventional standards, he would be considered an anti-Semite. But then he had a debate with, I don't remember if it was Jared Taylor or Greg Johnson or one of these people about race.
Taylor.
And is Jared Taylor? Yeah. I remember like Taylor was like laughing throughout this because Jones just kept talking about how race is a Protestant invention, and it was invented in the 18th or 17th century by English Protestants and Freemasons. There was one part in the debate where he said, in America, there are three races: Catholic, Protestant, and Jews.
Oh my God.
Which is, I don't even know what he meant by that. But yeah, it's like this form of kind of radical dissident politics that picks these. I mean, in Jones' case, obviously he's talking about the JQ, and that's uniquely controversial. But it's ironic that even though he'll touch on that, his Catholic politics otherwise makes him basically non-threatening, except for that one issue. And Milbank and Vermeulen and Amari are all the same. Like Vermeulen, I suspect the context of the debate that you were bringing up with Vermeulen and Dreher. It's like Vermeulen is a big fan of like world government. So his site that he runs with Pater Edmund, Pater Edmund's a much more likable guy. He's a priest in Austria. But the site they run called the Josias, Edmund has written this article, two articles actually. One is called Against the New Nationalism. It's criticizing right-wing populists in Europe. And the other one is titled something like Natural Law Requires World Government. And
see, I respect this. And I actually might even resonate with some of the things that they say. I remember, this is actually how I remember it. So Vermeulen tweeted out the podcast that I did, and he said, with friends like these, ... basically, like, I can't believe Richard Spencer is defending me, even though he's like a Nietzschean fascist or whatever.
Let's go.
And then he blocked me. So anyway, maybe I got a little too close. It's one thing to disagree with him, but it's another thing to agree with him. That's even more dangerous. I'll actually go read that. What did you say his last name was, the author?
It's the other guy. Everyone calls him Pater Edmund, Father Edmund, Edmund Waldstein. I can send you it DM, but it's on the Josias. He's been a blogger for a long time actually, and he has. I think I have it bookmarked. I could send it to you. He's like a 3-part series on Catholic notions of empire, going back to. I think he actually starts with like Virgil and the Aeneid. And it kind of traces this narrative, and it's actually pretty interesting. I think that like Vermeulen kind of vulgarizes it. The way I was going to criticize Vermeulen is like, well, he just translates this into basically like the United Nations. He's like, well, all these existing global institutions are basically great. We should just pretend that they have a Habsburg at the head or something like that.
Interesting.
Well, obviously these are not implicitly Catholic.
Maybe they are kind of implicitly Catholic in a weird way. But I see it. It's an interesting discussion to have.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So where is Dreher right now? So Dreher like lives in Hungary.
He's in Budapest.
Yeah. I was going to mention this Hungary aspect, if that's okay, because I think it's relevant.
Yeah, go for it.
Fundamentally, I think because our reality is like so secular and so sort of neoliberal in a sense, I think that you're always going to have this thing where our speech is ahead. if you're a certain way inclined, or your speech is always going to be ahead of where your actual convictions and feelings are. And I think, Richard, you'll remember this a lot from like the 2016 alt-right. I mean, a lot of motherfuckers like weren't even close in sentiment to some of the shit they were saying. You know what I mean? Like there was such a
No.
distance. You know, and one example of that with Rod Dreher is Hungary, where it's like he is totally constructed this hyper real understanding of Hungary, and to the extent that he like went there to live himself, because I spent like a lot of time in Hungary as a child, months at a time from the age of about 4 to 11, and
Yeah.
that place in Budapest, it is a crime-ridden, miserable place without diversity, right? Without mass immigration, um,
Right.
and this is the central city, and and you go into the small towns like Debrecen and other places, and it's just like there's just nothing. There's just nothing. But he's
Yeah.
just created, him and a few others have created this complete. And by the way, my stepfather's Hungarian. Uh, he and a few others have completed this have created this complete hyperreal understanding of Hungary that it's just almost unchallengeable now.
Yeah.
And
No,
it's
there
yeah.
CPAC went to Hungary. I mean, this is something I actually talked with this liberal that, and she was saying, she was like, all of these people seem to pick up, and she was giving me credit, even though she does not support any of these things. She was like, they'll pick up on things you did 10 years ago and then kind of like sanitize them and then actually achieve them. Whereas like you're always like way over your skis and shooting for the moon, and you send a rocket to the moon and it crashes. But he was like, they send a rocket to Nebraska or something and it actually gets there. But it's like, so what she was pointing out, like in 2014, I did this Budapest thing where it was like me, Alexander Dugin. It was just this crazy event, and I worked with Arctos, and Arctos got a hold of the Jobbik people, and I even then I was highly skeptical of Jobbik, but I kind of went along with it. It was like, oh, this will be interesting, and it's a political party and things like this. And it was treated as like front page news in Budapest. And when we arrived, they sicked you know, I don't know, internal security team on us, and I was arrested and spent a weekend in jail. I mean, it's kind of like a funny story, but it's like I think the lesson that Victor Orban learned from that is, well, we don't want these people who are just too like outrageous, like Spencer or Dugan or whatever, but we want to get the kind of like softer version of these people. Like we want CPAC to come here. We want Tucker Carlson to go report from Hungary about how they're battling China or whatever he said. And but we want to have a beachhead in American conservatism. And so it's just this kind of fascinating thing of like he lays down the hammer on me, and then but he's like, oh, but we want Rod Dreher to come and like blog from Hungary about how tradition has been revived and all this kind of stuff. It's very, very funny.
Yeah, like I'm from London. The first time I saw someone get mugged was in a train station in Hungary, and there's a whole few
Wow.
other things like that where it's just like, exposed to things as a child that the right would like to sort of transpose onto a upbringing in London, but the fact of the matter is, no, like that stuff was in Hungary, you know what I mean, and yeah, it amazes me because it's one of those examples where where you kind of sometimes you smell bullshit, but you're like, listen, I have no direct, reference myself. But it's like this is one of the things is like I know what you're saying is complete falsification. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
seeing you just propagate it endlessly. And obviously, I'm sure you've been there yourself and you spent time in a Hungarian jail cell. It's not.
Yeah.
It's what I mean. It's not a pleasant place to be. Like
No,
you know.
I did not think that we were reinventing the spirit of the Middle Ages.
Right, yeah,
No,
and just and just a final bit of context is that
post
when we
communist squalor was the thoughts
yeah,
that went through my mind.
also I'm saying this because we went there as like British people like a couple of years after, the wall came down, we were living like kings, and
Yeah.
still it wasn't that great. Like, you know what I mean? You know.
Yeah. Andrew, you wanted to jump in here?
Yeah, a few years ago when I was in South Carolina, I met a few guys, and they said that they actually knew you in real life, and they said that you and your family had ties with Hillary Clinton. Is that true?
No, we have no ties to Hillary Clinton. No.
Oh, okay. I'm
Okay.
just
Wow.
wondering. So what's up with that whole Milo situation that went down? And did he actually blackmail you with that video of your meltdown?
No.
Or is not the video, the audio recording where you're spewing all the racial slurs?
Yeah.
He recorded it, right?
No, he didn't. But goodbye. Wow, such really interesting discourse. Ace, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I don't know if you heard this earlier because someone mentioned E. Michael Jones, but one of the distinctions that he makes is when he's classifying historical American identity. I think he's doing a Sam Huntington thing where he's saying that long-term identity has more ties to religion over race, and so like voters would historically call themselves Catholic instead of Italian, for example. I don't know if he uses that example, but that's where the Protestant, Jew, Catholic identity, those three identities, he's trying to trace a historical lineage and leaving race out of it. It's a very strange thing, but I think Sam Huntington used that same strategy in one of those immigration books, if I remember right. So that was just more context.
Yeah, I mean, I don't fully disagree with that notion. Yeah, I mean, I remember I haven't read Sam Huntington's book on Who Are We in quite some time, but I remember he had language like it was like a tomato soup of a Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture, and then we've kind of added in some oregano or something is I think the metaphor.
It's
just making me hungry.
Right. It's frustrating on the far right Twitter because obviously they're trying to like push that wedge like E. Michael Jones versus Sam Francis or Jared Taylor, people who are like hyper racially aware.
Right.
And so it kind of muddies the waters when like obviously we can discern that race is a key component of identity, but we're probably not going to hear that from a Christian commentator.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like if someone has a really strong tendency or they have an axe to grind, it's a little bit more difficult to take them seriously. But if you're, like for instance, I mean, it is very clear that whites do not engage in block voting in the way that African Americans do. So 90% of African Americans will vote for a Democrat, no matter who he might be. And you can see some, again, these things will change kind of every year, but you can see block voting among Asians, you can see it among Muslims, you can see it to a lesser degree among Hispanics, and so on. Whites were really split down the middle. And is there are there kind of ethnic religious qualities to this? I have this good book by Colin Woodward. I've read about half of it. I kind of set it down. I haven't finished it, but it's very popular history. I mean, it's an easy read, but it's about all of these nations. There's kind of like the Deep South. There's the Yankees. There's the Far West. There's El Norte, the kind of Spanish Mexican quality of parts of Texas and New Mexico and Arizona. There's like New France in parts of Louisiana, but then also way up in Canada. I mean, I think it's interesting, and they're like clearly there's obviously Appalachia. So I mean, I think that these are real things. I don't think they should be dismissed. I mean, I remember when I was visiting Paul Gottfried. I think I've told this anecdote before, and I was driving from the South, and it was like when you entered Pennsylvania and you left like Appalachia slash Scots Irish Protestant redneck culture, it was just kind of amazing. It was like you left a place where there was an old car on bricks in someone's front yard, and you entered a place where there's this Germanic people like hyper manicured and there's like a garden gnome. I'm obviously being a little a little bit silly here, but you understand the point. Like there's clearly an ethnic division, and I think it would be interesting to do this in terms of understanding the ethnic quality of the vote. Like Charles Johnson has said this, and I agree with him on this, which is that, you know, Trump just has wrapped up the redneck vote. That the Scotch Irish, mostly Protestant vote, he just has it in the palm of his hand. And that is actually a powerful thing. You could also, I mean, again, you'd have to delve into the numbers on this, but you could also say that his victory was not just due to them, but due to the more Germanic, maybe more Catholic overall, kind of Midwestern type people who went for Trump, whereas they were inveterate Democratic voters previously, and then he kind of lost them in 2020. So he lost a lot of those Midwestern states that he had in 2016. I think that's a very interesting argument. Like there is a regional, ethnic, maybe as opposed to racial quality to voting. And so when white nationalists talk about, like, you know, we support the white race, and, you know, they seem to imagine that all whites are Republicans or something. And obviously it's very different than that. Like what the GOP represents is actually something very peculiar within the white race. And it's something that doesn't resonate with many people, and it doesn't really resonate with WASP in many ways. But yeah, so I think there's an interesting conversation to be had on these matters, but maybe someone who's so, you know, so hot after the damn Protestants like E. Michael Jones, maybe he's not the one.
Well, and
he'll turn me into a defender of like Martin Luther. He's so annoying.
well, and also one of the main takeaways from Slaughter of Cities, some people take is the obvious like white flight, you know, epidemic, a lot of the racial strife, the MLK riots in the 60s.
Yeah.
Like there's obviously a racial subtext, so it's not like you can't walk away from E. Michael Jones content with a racial lens. So I do think he's still
Right.
very valuable, even if some people see him as old.
You think he's more valuable than I do, and that's fair. I should go check out some of those books. I'm sure there's some good
Well,
stuff
I just
in
jumped
there.
into
You
this,
might just
but
need
have
to,
you
like,
guys seen the
go.
Muslim people like stomping on the gay flags?
Right. Yes, I have seen that.
Yeah,
I mean,
like I feel like that.
raises this. I think I retweeted something about that. I
Yeah,
mean, that raises the specter
right,
of this like Republican culture
right.
or politics going post-white. Because again, you could make this assumption, and the assumption was largely true. Like, what is the religious right? It is white people led by post-segregationists in the case of Jerry Falwell, and kind of many of the thought leaders being Catholic, actually.
But but speaking of the Muslim people at this protest against, you know, quote unquote, like gay ideology being taught at schools, like in full hijab, you know,
Yeah.
like where do you put that together? It's like they came to this country to avoid that, but they're still. Well,
I mean, I'm not sure they necessarily came here to avoid religious persecution. I'm a little bit torn by it. I mean, to go back to a little like what we were talking about before with what is his name? Solab Armani? It's not.
It's hard to remember.
Sorry.
It doesn't matter.
Amar. Okay, yeah, it doesn't. We'll call him Armani for now, Mr. Armani. You know, like he'll go into this stuff about like how, you know, like transgender, you know, issues. It's fundamentally challenging our most essential notions of what it means to be a human, and we have to stand up for this. And look, okay, to be fair here, I get it, and you know, I'm not a big fan of this stuff, and so on. You know, that being said, the transgender.
I think it's about what you just said, like about being a human, like biologically.
Yeah, I know, I get it. I truly do get it, and I'm not a supporter of it.
Yeah.
what I'm saying is that like it ultimately does involve a very small percentage of the population, a tiny one.
Yeah.
It's much smaller than like Muslims in the country. And these same arguments were made about gays, not just gay marriage, but homosexuals were like fundamentally challenging our basic notions about what it means to be human. And these same arguments were made about race, 60 years ago, about how this is fundamentally challenging
Well,
our
to this
identity of
day.
what it means to be human. Yeah, an interracial marriage, that is just a fundamental assault. So we have all these conservatives who are kind of like constantly talking about their last stand on behalf of humanity. And they keep like everything just keeps ratcheting, and they start like choosing a new thing to be outraged about
But
and to
when we speak
pontificate.
about conservatives, do we speak about Christians? Like, who are we like?
Yeah, well, I think, yeah, I mean, you can
Or
find
any
plenty of.
fundamentalist religion.
Well, I'm talking
I
about.
think that's important.
Well, hold on. I'm talking about paleo conservatives and their arguments. So, like, Armani will make these arguments about like the fundamental assault on human dignity evinced by a transsexual, and then he'll be like, "Oh, Glenn Greenwald, like let me have you back on the program, and we can talk about how the liberals are bad or what." So there's just this kind of like silliness where they it just takes them like 15 years to fully accept something, and then they move on to the next thing that they
Well, what's the
claim is like
something?
the something is some kind of social liberation
Right.
or human deconstruction. And look, I'm not exactly a progressive on these matters, but
We can tell.
yeah, but my criticism is of them. Like at the end of the day, this rhetoric is overheated, and they're ultimately not serious about it. Like Armani has accepted the gay revolution. It just took him longer. And so like a wasp in who lives in New York City or San Francisco, who might very well be heterosexual and kind of conservative in his aesthetics and so on, just accepted that like circa 1992 because he just realized where the wind was blowing. He was kind of smarter and just realized that like, it's
well,
going to
he
take
or her. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. It's like it's going to take them a few years to get this done, but I should get out ahead of it. And you're not going to win this battle, so there's no point in fighting it. And so I almost have like, I don't know, a little more
But it was
respect
less
for
of a
the
battle back
liberal
then
wasp.
as well, too.
What?
It was less of a battle back then as well.
What
like,
do you think that transsexuality is the end game, or do you think that like 10 years from now,
the
Armani is going to
question
be
makes
like,
no sense because
listen,
people are going to be
hold on,
transgender no matter what.
Hold on, I'm muting you. Okay, it's my space. I'm in charge here. Is Armani going to be like, we have these patriotic transgendered Americans who fought in our military, and they love our country as much as I do, but this new trend of bestiality, this is just an assault to human dignity. Like it kind of don't. Do you think that he's going to be like that, or do you think that this is the end? I'm asking Xbox here because you'll have a deeper like. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, are they going to fold on this and then find a new outrage to pontificate on, or is this kind of like or have they been pushed to a limit, or are we about to see a kind of backlash politics that I've been talking about, where like in many ways the conservatives are they're kind of they're reversing on many things. I mean, in 2016, no one talked about gay issues in the Trump movement. It was just a kind of non-thing. Now you start to hear, not necessarily from like top politicians, but you start to hear not just an attack on like groomers, but an attack on the whole thing. Gayness writ large. What is your opinion on that?
it does seem to me like there has been a shift, at least in the like online activist right. I don't know if Republican voters are another thing, but like the kind of the momentum of the right has shifted to a more explicitly social conservative and honestly like sectarian Christian, like heavily Catholic
Yeah.
push against these issues. In a way that's very different in 2016. Like in 2016, very few people in the kind of internet right had a problem with Trump hugging the gay pride flag on stage.
Yeah.
Now I think that people, Trump's hardcore online supporters are humiliated by that kind of thing. But
Yeah.
if you look at like Pew data on public opinion on transgender issues, how many genders do you think there are? Do you think that children should be allowed to undergo hormone therapy or whatever? Public opinion has shifted, I think, 5 or 6 points since 2020
Yeah.
in a more conservative direction. I'm kind of skeptical about that. Like, I don't think that has a lot of staying power because all of the elite institutions are very much building and consolidating a consensus on LGBT. And there's strong institutional pressures not to dissent from that consensus. So if elite opinion is solidly in one camp for a long time, I think they'll win out and the public will lose.
Do we
tend
have
to
an
agree.
elite consensus?
I
Okay.
think that there's clearly
I think there's an elite consensus on this. I tend to agree with you, but things change, and
Rapidly.
yeah, well, but they don't always change. They happen all. It's the classic line from "The Sun Also Rises." Like, how do you go bankrupt? Slowly, but then all at once. Like things. Or Nietzsche had a line of sometimes centuries pass and nothing happens, and then sometimes years pass and everything happens. There are like major shifts, and I think it's possible that we're going to see like an extreme backlash politics that is actually effective. And I don't necessarily support this, and I think a crazy pagan Nietzschean, like myself, might even be targeted by the by these forces. Although I'm probably not going to be number one on their list, but I think the backlash might actually win at some point.
What exactly is the backlash you're talking about? Like,
well, the backlash is a very big thing. You could see a lot of backlash with Trump. In the sense of like Trump as the FU to the system candidate. There's something going wrong. 2016 also coincided with like the first like falls in living standard, but also even like falls in life expectancy and things like that. Like very small, gradual. But when I was a kid, we almost thought that by 2016, life expectancy should be like 200 years or something. You'll be as old as Isaac or something. That hasn't happened. So there's a backlash brewing, and I think it will.
Wait, you thought you were going to be 200 years old?
Good Lord. Okay, Hannah. All right, you can stay in.
It's a little hyperbole, but
I'm obviously engaging in hyperbole, guys. Calm down. But that we had a sense of ever expanding momentum towards greater economic progress, and so there's a backlash that's coming. I think that backlash could be expressed in racial ways, like the attacks on Hispanic rapists coming from Trump, etc. But I think at least for now, it's non-racial and it's fixated on gays and lesbians, and the transgender issue is just kind of like the tip of it. But Xbox, do you want to respond? Or
just a question on this. I agree that there is some kind of backlash of social conservatism on the LGBT stuff right now, but I don't think this will succeed. And the main reason is that like this backlash can't just be, if it is to succeed, it can't just be boycotting Dylan Mulvaney or Bud Light or whatever. It has to take like an institutional form. So it needs elites, which those people are emerging. I think a lot of them are kind of contemptible, like Sohrab Ahmari. But you have these spokesmen of national conservatism or whatever, which I think is very artificial. But you have these elites can come into place. But like it also needs demographic base that can kind of materialize this
I
politics.
get it,
and that's the problem. I think that obviously the core of GOP voters who can be sympathetic to this form of politics are demographically shrinking, at least proportionately. And I think that you might think that the Republicans are going to be able to bring over a lot of, we mentioned Muslims earlier today. That's a minuscule percentage of the population, but a lot of Hispanic conservatives or something like that. But I'm just really skeptical about whether this post-racial populism can actually be a successful electoral strategy for Republicans.
No, I totally agree with everything you just said. But what I'm saying is that sometimes it actually is different, and it might be a grotesque backlash that will offend even a staunch conservative like yourself. Like I'm thinking more like Taliban than I am First Things magazine. Like it will, precisely because they don't have any real institutions. They've got some webzines. They've got the Israeli-backed National Conservatives or whatever. They've got JD Vance and all that kind of stuff. But I think what I'm saying is you can't win that way. Like you're going to be outnumbered and outgunned monetarily and intellectually by the left. But sometimes, like we might be headed. I mean, this is like a general pessimism that I have. We might be headed towards a general breakdown, and we can see like a J6 like thing occur at against gays directly, like that gay pride, bacchanalia that occurred this past weekend, like that will be attacked. Or even the kind of, I mean, I know this is overwrought and stuff, but like even the kind of book burning, like banning books in Florida, I know it's all overwrought, but it's kind of there. Like on some level, the liberals are right. Like there is that energy might be simmering, and it might be kind of dumb, but dumb energy can sometimes win. Like at some point, these elites won't be able to stop this.
But the political consequences of that are all too predictable, right? It's just like somebody does like a Christchurch shooting at a pride parade, and all of the respectable conservative elites who are associated with this form of anti-gay politics, they quickly apologize and kind of they get embarrassed of the issue. There's FBI investigations, and people get their money frozen and everything. And there's a public backlash, I think.
Can I offer something on this? I think that there's two things going on at once quite often. So you often have sort of the moving defense, the defense in depth tactics, as Richard was describing them, as these moving goalposts, this new last stand all the time, and you also have the backlash, and it's very selective, and I think it's selective on a basis of political opportunism and power. So the most recent example of this contrast to me is that so we've had that clip of the Muslim family and the children stomping on the pride flags, and everybody like Armani and everybody like him, jumped on that, but they didn't jump on the as much. I didn't see the pride event at the White House, and that person with their chestless photo and this, that, and the other, because they recognize that, even though I kind of reject that whole thing, they recognize it as quite an adroit political move on the behalf of Biden. You know what I mean? That will open him up to like many, many, many people. So they don't criticize that. So when they can criticize when it's politically safe in a strategic, numbers driven sort of way, that's when the backlash comes out. But when they're looking at like strategy, that's when they're starting to like, okay, well, you know what, like I don't support legal or underage dog fucking, but if you're over 21, sure, you can fuck a dog if you want. That's where that kind of thing kind of comes into it,
Yeah. I let me just reiterate what I'm saying. I think you're getting at what I'm what I was talking about. I agree with all of Xbox Live's like reasonable critiques and understanding of institutions. I get it all. But like at some point the Taliban arose, you know, and sometimes the backlash actually works.
Yeah,
And
I sorry to cut over you, but I think what you're getting at is that like these sort of these regulating energies like Armani and Drea, they're not in control of the people that follow them. I think that's
no, they're like a cheerleading squad or something. Like they're not really in control of this stuff. And none of those people are motivated by Armani. Like they none of those people stomping on pride flags have ever read Compact magazine or whoever this weird Persian Catholic convert is. They have no idea. They're not motivated by him. He's just kind of justifying it. None of those people read Rod Dreher's Benedict Option, bestseller. I mean, they're reacting to something else, and all of these other people are just kind of rationalizing it, or pretending that this is something that supports them, and stuff like that. And so I do think it has a momentum all of its own. And if I were a betting man, or like if I'm being as reasonable, as realistic as possible, I would agree with everything that Xbox said. But I'm just saying, like, things can get out of hand, and movements can radicalize. I mean, this is just one example. Maybe it's not the best one, but I mean, the Berlin Wall came down due to reformist communists. So there were many protests in Germany I maybe even beginning in 1988 of Wir sind das Volk. So we are the people. And they wanted communism of the human face. They wanted reform, more feedback from their elites and all that kind of stuff. But they had no desire whatsoever to overthrow communism. They had no desire to reunify Germany. And it started to build, and it started to have a new quality almost kind of organically. And it changed at one point where they stopped saying Wir sind das Volk, we are the people, and they started saying Wir sind ein Volk, which means we are a people. And it became a kind of German nationalism. Interestingly, as a tidbit, Margaret Thatcher opposed the reunification of Germany because she saw it as like a revival of Nazism or something. But maybe she was kind of getting at something. I mean, I don't like Margaret Thatcher.
It doesn't. I wouldn't say that it applies to Germany in that sense. She's getting at a principle, an overall principle, and or a dynamic that can lead to. We're almost talking about like political physics here in a sense, Richard. You know what I mean? It's like
Exactly.
I think she can see a dynamic there. In my personal view, I think it would be a bit much to apply it to Germany in the 1990s or even Germany now. But I understand like what would motivate her to sort of be thinking that way in the very least,
Or like Ukrainian nationalism. Like, don't the Russians have a point when they say, like, you're not an actual people. The creation of your state was a mistake. And
it's over.
They got
him. They got him.
Let me finish. At this point, if you want to tell a Ukrainian you're just a Russian, they're going to punch you in the face and or laugh at you. I mean, they are clearly now a nation. And so like things can, you can make arguments and stuff like that, but like there is a political physics to all this stuff, and things can kind of emerge that you didn't expect. And again, like the J6, there were people who funded that thing. There were people who, had legal theories about it. There were people who bust people in, et cetera, et cetera. But like, there was a organic, you could say, madness of crowds that pushed that over the edge. Like you can't always predict these things. And granted, J6 was a spectacular failure, but like, it might not be the next time, like these things can, the cup can kind of spill over. and yeah, something transforms into something that you couldn't imagine. So that's just kind of what I'm suggesting about the right. Like the multiracial working class coalition, it's kind of like a stupid meme that's literally put forward by Marco Rubio, but like at some point the working class interdenominational let's hang gay people, that could turn into something. And I'm not saying this as to urge it on or to participate in it. I'm just saying that like these things happen, and Americans have lost their minds. I mean, let's keep this in mind. All the things that we took for granted 20 years ago are just out the window at this point. I mean, I could see populism turning into something very different very quickly.
Yeah.
Xbox?
Yeah, this is pretty unrelated. I mean, I just as a quick point on what you were saying, I guess I'm the reason why I'm skeptical is it seems like in most cases these sorts of movements have at least some kind of institutional support. You need the military, even if you're outsiders, you need the colonels, the lower of the ranking officers or something to support you. January 6th, you've said before, I mean, it's a clown show. It's like they had no chance of succeeding at all. Even if there were some elites like Trump who maybe thought it could.
Yeah.
But as just an unrelated question, because we were talking about reunification of Germany, so Thatcher opposed German reunification. Interestingly enough, recently he's talked about this. Paul Gottfried says that he laments German reunification and thinks it was a disaster. And I was curious what you thought about the reunification.
What was his argument? Because they adopted the liberalism of the West or something? Is that what he said?
Yeah, basically it was like nostalgia, like nostalgia for East Germany. It was like, East Germany was like a Prussian state.
Yeah.
And they could have held out. I mean, I think also he generally has a good point, which there was an account on Twitter that I think is gone now, Nigel Carlsbad, and he cited all this stuff from like the late 40s through to the late 1950s of these movements in Germany to try to kind of dislocate Germany from NATO and create some kind of, independent power negotiating between East and West.
That I've talked about. So I even kind of worked on this a little bit in graduate school. So Konrad Adenauer is a fascinating figure. He was an ancient person when he became chancellor and was the generation before Hitler. I mean, it was like your grandparents taking over control after the middle-aged people fucked everything up or something. And he was also Catholic. He's from the Rhineland. And there is strong evidence, that Beria was willing to reunify Germany in a so-called Austrian solution. And he was actually, basically, the Day era was more trouble than it was worth. And he was willing to reunify Germany and neutralize it. So it would not be a member. It was very similar to what we're dealing with today. Like, it would never be a member of NATO. There would be no American or NATO weapons, or certainly not nuclear weapons in Germany proper. It would be a neutral country, but it would basically be like Austria, i.e. it would be capitalist. And Konrad Adenauer basically wouldn't return his phone calls. And Adenauer himself was kind of eager in a way to get rid of the Protestant Prussian Germany. And I mean, Gottfried has looked back at this like a Schumacher, I believe is his name, who was this social democrat who was very anti-Hitler, but also very anti-Soviet. And he was kind of like a Protestant, like Prussian socialism, like that. He was like highly conservative, workers' labor party, but in many ways, very right wing. And so there are these different forces, and Adenauer, this old man, he was like Biden's age and up, basically maintained the kind of West German idea. And I think he was almost like, he also thought that the Day era was more trouble than it's worth. It's like, let's have a Catholic Europe. And he was very integral in building up the European Union, which I think he saw as a kind of Christendom and a Catholic one. I mean, granted, like he was the leader of effectively the Centrum Party. He was the leader of the Christian Democratic, group. Tons of Protestants voted for him, of course. And he wasn't a bigot, but that was the background for a lot of his geopolitics. And I think there's a lot to that, actually. But yeah, no, I'm pro-West, pro-NATO. I guess I kind of like how things turned out in a way. Reunified Germany in NATO with nukes. Let's go.
One of the things I've noticed,
but also EU,
like a little.
So I kind of like Adenauer in many ways.
One of the things I've noticed is like a little thematic thread on sort of DR third worldism, like a development, is that there's a lot of like GDR sort of nostalgia videos that I've seen that are starting to pop up. It's very, very interesting because it's like I don't it just seems silly, but I guess that's not really a huge shock.
Well, I mean, I remember Jonathan Bowden said this at many points. I remember him saying it in a speech where he was like, communism attacks the body and liberalism rots the soul. And it's so ironic that all of these Eastern European countries are based and stuff like that. And you can find, like, there's a lot of evidence for this. I mean, the belief in God is stronger. It's weakest in Protestant lands. It's stronger in Catholic lands. And I mean, some of these Northern European countries are majority atheist and pretty remarkable things like that. And you have this kind of backward Eastern Europe. I mean, I think there's something to that, but, just demanding, like, they're not really, none of these countries are really saved from liberalism. I mean, Romania now has Instagram. I think a lot of conservatives are projecting all these fantasies upon Russia right now as this, like, stalwart of Orthodox Christianity. And so I think people are just projecting fantasies onto it. Like, belief in God is lower in Russia than it is in the United States. And, like, drug use is higher, abortion's higher, etc.
And I do think it's a bit exaggerated how religious Eastern Europe is, because with the exception of Poland, I don't think many of these places are as religious as, I mean, like what was East Germany is still one of the most atheist places on the planet.
Yeah.
Today.
But it is a trend. The post-Soviet world, more or less, is more the higher beliefs in God, I would say. You wanted to comment on this, Xbox?
Can I just go back to what you said about Christian backlash, or Catholic backlash?
Hold
because
that thought. I think Xbox wants to comment on this, but yeah, I can go back to that.
I was just going to say really quickly, I mean, it's kind of a case-by-case thing where, like, Czech Republic and East Germany are two of the most secular places in the world. Obviously, they're post-Soviet, but they're integrated to NATO. On the other hand, Poland and Romania, which are both NATO members, post-Soviet, are two of the most religious countries in Europe. I think Romania is, unless you count, like, Crete or Malta or something, Romania is the most religious country in Europe. I actually visited there last year in Bucharest. And it's notably, I mean, even though that's probably one of the most secular parts of Romania because it's the capital city, largest city, it's notably much more religious than anything you would see in the United States. People crossing themselves in public all the time. And the final thing I was going to say was that in Russia, some of these statistics are a little bit misleading, that I think they underestimate Russian religiosity. So, for example, people side-by-side compare weekly church attendance, and which in Russia, it's far lower than the United States. That's a little bit inaccurate or misleading, though, because in Orthodoxy, you're not actually required to attend liturgy every single week, whereas in Latin Christianity, Catholicism, and Protestants generally do think that you have a Sunday obligation. The other thing I would say is that in Russia, the statistics show that the
I'm not sure I buy that, but go on. I think it's pretty accurate statistic, but go on.
No, I think it is an accurate statistic, but I think it's slightly misleading about the ways in which religiosity are expressed in a Slavic Orthodox versus a Western Christian, Protestant, and Catholic context. The final thing I was going to say is that Russia's religiosity is dragged down by the fact that the old in Russia tend to be much less religious than the young. So rates of Orthodox identification are growing with each successive generation since the 1990s. So I think things might change, but yeah, I'm generally pessimistic. I think Russia is one of the more, from a traditionalist conservative perspective, I would like Russia to become more Orthodox, and I think that they are trending in that direction. But obviously, Russia has all sorts of other dysfunctions. High rates of.
I mean, and if you just look at this at the level of like a more interpersonal level or like a personality aspect of it, when I think of people who have a lot of religious fundamentalists and a lot of cults, I don't think of Romanians, I don't think of Hungarians or Czechs or Russians. I think of Americans and Poles. So I don't really get where these people get this idea that, I mean, when I think of I said this to someone a while ago. If I think of like a person who would like sell their house to give money to a pastor or like an evangelical preacher, I think of an American. I never heard any anecdote of that happening in like Ukraine or Russia or Romania. So I mean, this idea that like Russians are like inherently religious fundamentalists, it's sort of weird to me. But there's sort of another thing here I wanted to talk about, because you talked about backlash, and I just think it's. I mean, because I actually wrote an article about this, which I haven't sent in to anyone yet, because I do think it's kind of interesting how people, how conservatives are very drawn to Catholicism in the Anglosphere specifically, but also other parts of traditionally Protestant Europe. Because I do think it has this appeal that it's not really serious at the end of the day, because if you're like Rod Dreher, you can still live like a lifestyle as like a journalist or a editorial writer in Budapest, and you don't really have to and you can have the exact same lifestyle as your atheist neighbor,
Right.
so it doesn't really affect anything. Whereas if you were to be like if you actually were to be like serious, and it's not malleable as well, as you alluded to, that you can have like Blair White, who is this tranny who hates gay people, and be like, oh, I'm like a transsexual, but I think drag queen story hour is too far, and blah blah blah. So you can sort of like yeah, and it's sort of like almost conquistadors, where they sort of like Catholicism incorporate these new traditions, and it's very malleable in that manner, and you don't really see that. My point is simply this. I mean, if they were like actual serious conservatives, they should like convert to Islam or anything, or or Amish or something, because that's like. But they don't want that, because then they have to change their lifestyle. Because if you look at Idlib, for instance, that is a place which is much more conservative now than it was in 2010, and yet it's like zero appeal to conservatives, because they know they have to follow some very strict.
What country or state did you refer to?
Idlib. It's in northern Syria, run by
okay.
Salafists.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, give them time.
Yeah.
I mean, this is kind of like the future imagined by Welbeck of all of these right-winger, kind of secular right-wingers making peace with Islam, because it maintain the security of the sovereignty of marriage and the family and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but the thing is, I can imagine like a series of. The thing is,
hey, Hannah, listen, all right?
People are speaking.
I was nice to let you back on. You can't interrupt. Secondly, the way I do things, which has been made clear by how I do them, is that I'll speak, I'll take a question, we'll have a back and forth. We're not just like talking constantly or something, all right? All right, go.
Yes, I was just going to say that, I mean, when I say like Muslims take, I can imagine them taking over like a country or like a province and turning into like a Salafist theocracy. I don't see that among like these right-wing Christians, at least not like in mainstream sects. I could like imagine maybe like something like the Jehovah's Witness or something, but they're not really violent or something like that. But I don't really see this with these people.
No, you're being pedantic here. What I see happening is an almost kind of like secular religious melding or something. Like it's with a lot of these MAGA people, they're not even part of a denomination. I mean, it's true that you have a ton of Catholicism among elite, conservatives, and I guess I use elite ironically in this case. and in the Supreme Court and all that kind of stuff. And you see the rad trad Twitter where everyone's apparently converted to Catholicism and they have a avatar that features Japanese anime. I mean, we've seen all this, but the people who are going to actually be the boots on the ground for this crazed backlash that I am foreseeing, they're not going to even know what denomination they're a part of. They're not going to really know what they're even doing. It's going to be kind of in the name of Christianity on some level, but it's going to be more violent and brutal than it is dogmatic. And I would imagine the Amish are going to be churning butter while this is going on.
I almost wish these people were Amish instead. That might be better for them. We have Jehovah's Witness and just isolate themselves. That's like the true Benedict option.
Yeah, it is. But of course, Rod Dreher is not willing to do that. Okay, Hannibal, you've had your hand up for a while.
Oh yeah, Ace made a comment in regards to the I forget the Catholic guy. Forgot his
E.
name.
Michael Jones.
E. Michael Jones, and the relation between like sort of like the Catholic, the traditional intelligentsia in regards to race and religion, and there's some sort of precedent for of that with Triumph magazine, which was founded by Brad Bosell, the father, and they pretty much emphasize, and this was around the 60s and 70s, and they pretty much emphasize Catholicism in opposition to the idea of race. And they even had like they were Catholic traditionalists, even like closely related to Spain, for instance. And when you read Triumph magazine, there are like moments that they write America like the Maoists did, right? With like KKK, like America Kaka. So, so this sort of like emphasis on religious identity over race is not new, right? Even Brad Bosell, if I'm not mistaken, he ended up his life working for charity.
Yeah, I mean, Brent Bozell ghost wrote The Conscience of a Conservative for Barry Goldwater, and I think at the end of his life, he was asked to like autograph copies, and he said he would write something like "Not my conscience" or something. And his son, of course, is kind of a conservatard. Who does, what is it, like minding the media or some kind of conservative watchdog group where they complain about liberals and the New York Times or something. But his father actually did adopt a kind of radical, maybe, quasi or almost, E. Michael Jones style traditionalism and traditional Catholicism.
His son was at Jan 6, wasn't he?
Oh, the third generation was at Jan 6. I would not be. I think I heard that somewhere. I would not be surprised at all.
I don't know. Is that consistent with the family business? Is that the conservative trajectory?
I mean, they kind of like have, they're full spectrum, right wingers. They
I guess
do the whole gamut.
I guess that's better than Buckley, for what it's worth. Even though I think Bolzel dated one of Buckley's family members.
Yeah, but it was like a form of traditional Catholicism that was extremely anti-American in nature.
Who was?
The Bosell, the father, yes. It was very anti-American insofar as they identify America with Protestantism.
Yeah.
Franco.
It makes sense. Yeah,
oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, so this sort of like, and this is basically if you are around circles of traditionalists in Catholic traditionalists in Europe, that's sort of the identification that they made, and they tend to be anti-American. So they and the Brett Bosell thing that he founded Truth Magazine, he had like close connections with the Carlists in Spain. So there was like a huge Carlist philosophical influence in them. Especially there was one intellectual among them. He was a Thomist. He was friends with McLuhan, I think, and because McLuhan was also a Catholic, and his name was Frederick Wilhelmsen, and he actually was a Carlist. He entered the traditionalist circles in Spain. Although he's more like he's a obscure figure. Yeah.
All right. Let's Patrick, you've had your hand up for a while. You have the floor.
Can you hear me okay, bud?
Yeah.
Originally, I was going to ask you about the last time we kind of interacted, and I know like we didn't get to really like talk to each other because it was on trial space. But you guys brought up some interesting topics. I wanted to get to you about like the kind of like the economy thing and the Ukraine thing, but the LGBTQ thing, like I think that might be like. Do you think it might be like a downfall of like the conservatives? Because like it seems like just a bullshit social issue at this point. Like they let it go too far, and I really don't agree with like this idea like it's kind of being pushed amongst conservatives. We're like, well, as long as it doesn't happen to the kids, or like what happens in the bedroom stays in the bedroom. Like they should have kind of like held their ground, almost like in my opinion, like not letting it happen at all. Like I know like I guess the party doesn't really have much control over it, but like I think like as soon as like gay marriage was like accepted, like that was kind of like the end of like this, like fighting it, and it seems like something that's just kind of like a diversion, almost, in my opinion. What do you think of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's a diversion in some ways. I mean, I understand also like how people really don't like the idea of transsexuality in general, but don't like it in particular with children. I mean, I totally get this. But yeah, I mean, my tendency is to just say that like, oh yeah, it's going to be kind of bullshit, and they're going to make their peace with it, just like they did gays and gay marriage and all that kind of stuff. But I'm kind of questioning that. My what I was stressing before is that like at some point these things do change, and like this might really get serious. I mean, I don't want to sound like a shrill liberal, but Michael Knowles or whatever said outright, like we must eradicate transsexuality from our society. It's not just about hormones and sports teams. We have to eradicate. I mean, that is genocidal language. I mean, and I obviously it's not technically genocide. You get what I mean here, but like that is the kind of eradicating language that you might have heard around the edges about homosexuals. Like you could have found some conservative at CPAC that said it's not just about marriage. We needed to eliminate homosexuals in society, but that would have been very rare. And you might have heard some genocidal language. I don't think you would have, actually. I was about to say involving race, but I don't think you would have. But they've taken, I mean, it's a small issue in terms of numbers. I mean, the percentage of transsexuals in any society is very small, but this seems real for them. And
no, I was going to say,
like I don't think anyone can underestimate it. You kind of can't go back on all this stuff after what's being said. And remember, that was not Nick Fuentes at AFPAC or whatever. That was Michael Knowles from the Daily Wire at CPAC, and they're talking like that. I mean, I think it's significant, actually.
No,
Paulie,
well, but what does that translate into?
I don't know how you commit genocide against transsexuals, but like it translates it must the fact that that's an applause line is significant. I mean, Trump said that at one point. He was like, I talk about lowering your taxes and no one cares, and then I say something about transsexuals in swimming, and everyone, it's an applause line. I mean, it's going to translate at some point. It's not just, they're not just talking about airy stuff that like has no significance or something. They're not talking about, is the bread at Eucharist, is that a metaphor or the real thing? We have disagreements on this. They're talking about something that actually can translate into something. I mean, you can ban that at schools. You can, ban from a public institution. You could ban anyone not using the biological pronouns or whatever. They have banned drag shows, and those are getting overturned. Those laws are getting overturned by various state Supreme Courts, where they're like, you obviously can't do this. It's a free speech issue, but they're trying it, and who knows? They can get away with it. You can certainly ban abortion. I mean, that's happening. So these things can happen, and I think they very well might.
Can we speak on the abortion thing for a second?
Okay, but don't derail us. Go.
I won't. You want to go first?
You go first, Hannah.
I mean, like, just going off what he was saying, like, it's a real thing. And I mean, I heard a quote, I think, that most men are very much pro-choice, right?
Well, most of the public is. I don't know. I assume it's stronger among men, but I don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's hard to put into language, but it's like.
What I was going to say about the issue, and I wanted to get to the Ukraine thing and pick your brain on that, maybe the economy will get time, but like the thing I kind of like, and I don't like vote, I'm too poor, I'm like peasant class, and like, I just kind of like look at this as a hobby because I'm too old to play sports and have kids and stuff. But like, one thing I was going to say is like, it seems odd to me that like, because it's kind of like you mentioned, like a free speech issue, but at the same time, or like a freedom issue almost, but then at the same time, it's like, it could be used to kind of like pick away at like constitutional rights almost. And I think you see it happen. Like it could be used like, and I look at like this whole, I guess like Republican Democrat thing is like a Machiavellian tactic to divide up the country anyway. But like, it just seems like, it seems like a great way, like in a non-issue way to get like Republicans on board with like, restricting free speech, restricting freedoms, red flag laws. Like if there's too many training shooters, it's really odd. But like I think the Republican Party as a whole like really lost, this battle, and they should just give it up. And it's really odd to me that like they're defending it now when it comes to kids, but they weren't there to defend it when it came to marriage. They weren't there to defend it like, when it came to the idea in general, because like marriage institutionally has always been, to bear children. Like, and as long as there was a possibility, to bear children, marriage should be between a man and a woman, and they weren't fighting it then. And then they kind of like went with this whole attitude where it was like, oh, what happens in the bedroom stays in the bedroom. If it's between two consenting adults, but look what it leads to. And it's like, it almost like declines the birth rate as a whole, because like at the same time, like, and I'm not a pedophile, I have children, but like when I was talking to somebody else about statutory rape laws, like, and I think they're like in I guess like theory they're okay, but like in practice they're totally wrong if you're like saying from like I guess like Christian Catholic, perspective, which I'm horrible at. I'm not a good Catholic, I'm not a good Christian. I try to be. I used to be an atheist, but like what I'm saying is like they both like both. It's two sides of the same coin. It declines the birth rate, and like when I look at like this, the practice of statutory rape.
But do you really care about the birth rate?
Kind of, yeah. Like obviously, like I think so. But like it's declining. But what I was going to get to in America, specifically amongst white people, and not that I'm white, like supremacist white people are kind of stupid in my opinion. But like what I was going to get to was like, what confuses me, like with this grooming argument Republicans make, it's kind of stupid because like the decline of like the birth rate in general in our country, stems from these statutory, rape laws, which are honestly, like in my opinion, I used to be a federal law enforcement officer, are only applied to black people, black males particularly, when they knock up white women. So it's just like, very odd to me because there's like these parental like consent, like limitations in them. But it's just like very confusing. But And I don't want to go off on that too much because I think the LGBTQ thing is like just stupid, like sidewinding. Like, and I don't understand why the Republican Party is like, I guess like basing its.
So hold on real quick. So
Yeah.
you're saying that so statutory rape laws, you're talking about like sex with teenagers?
Yeah, sex.
And
Like I think like most states
like not pedophilia, but like.
Well, I think pedophilia only applies to either homosexuals,
Yeah.
like getting kids, or also like prepubescent kids. But like in general, like this idea of protecting kids, doesn't protect 14-year-olds from 80-year-old predators. It really just like kind of only applies to like maybe a 17-year-old black kid who knocks up a 14-year-old in high school. In reality, does that make sense or no? Like, am I crazy here?
Kind of. Yeah. Okay, Polly, you've got the floor.
Oh, sorry.
Save us from statutory rape commentary, please.
Yeah, just side note, the majority of pedophiles are heterosexual. But anyway,
Is that true?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's
like 40% are homosexual, and like what 2.5% of the adult male population is homosexual. So there is disproportionate.
Well, no.
I mean, those stats are not really accurate. I think that's like, I actually checked this number like last year. So I think like 8% of people are men who have had sex with other men. So,
yeah,
like,
well, it's actually a serious. It's a very serious issue, Xbox, and this affects you as a Catholic. Sorry, I kind of went there, but. There's a distinction that needs to be made, actually, and you don't win any points from this distinction because it's all bad, basically, and it almost sounds like you are defending someone, but which I am absolutely not. But we have a stereotype in our minds about a pedophile as this creepy guy, or maybe a Boy Scout troop leader, or a Catholic priest, or whatever. Most abuse occurs in the home. It's not occurring in these institutions. And the other thing about it is that sometimes this abuse will be homosexual, sometimes not, but it will not necessarily be done by people who are general threats to society.
Oh, can I please step in and say one thing? Because I studied this.
No.
I did.
Hannah, I believe you, but you got to let me finish, because this is a very serious subject, and I don't want anyone misunderstanding what I say here.
Please do.
So when I say that they are not a threat to the public at large, I am not by any means trying to lessen their crime. All I'm saying is that there'll often be a situation of an evil uncle or an evil father, sometimes even evil mother or something like that. They're not going to attack they're not going to go become a school principal and abuse children or what have you. It happens within the home as incest, and it's almost like worse on some level, but it is what it is. So when these people are saying that like their target is grooming people, I mean, look, I'm not a big fan of rainbow nonsense or whatever, but like that is a minuscule crime, if it is a crime, in comparison with child abuse that does occur in the home. And so hopefully this is an extremely sensitive subject, but it should be talked about, but hopefully no one has misunderstood.
Can I make a short comment?
I say one thing I wanted to say?
I'm being fair here, Hannah.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I did this at Rutgers. I wrote a thesis about how a pedophile, there should be a different name for a pedophile that does not commit pedophilic crimes, right? So there is this huge thing where there are more pedophiles don't do anything than there are pedophiles that do something.
Mm-hmm.
And that needs to be like realized in the context of this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I make a really short comment about this?
Please.
Because because
But
I
it
almost
is a
get.
study.
Yeah. I'm not going to comment what you say. I mean, I'm sure what you say is true or whatever, but anyways, I mean, I always get like, it's almost like when people talk about legalizing cannabis or like some weird drugs, where I just think like, why are you so in, like the first guy who brought up, I just think like, why are you so interested in talking about it? Because I just get a weird feeling. It's almost a bit like, actually, like there was like an anti-drug campaign about I mean in my country, and one of the signs they said that you should look out for if you suspect a relative have drug addiction is do they take like a positive
well, the addiction
drug
is
hang
what,
on
right?
hang on, let me speak. And the campaign basically said like you should look out for people who are like positively
inclined,
who are like positive, in a political sense, where they talk about it's so unfair how drug dealers are treated or whatever. And I do think it's like the same thing with like when people talk about statutory stuff, where you just think like, why are you so interested in like nuancing this subject? It's so weird, and I just get uncomfortable.
Well, I think the thing about pedophiles is like you were born with a inclination to something or other, and either way.
I don't really like talking about this.
I'm sorry about Hannah. I keep giving her second chances. This is like my conservative. I just made a rather nuanced point, I could be misunderstood in what I was saying. I don't think I will be, but like, I kind of don't want to hear about the nice pedophile, who like doesn't commit, the abstinent pedophile. I mean, like
the ones that make good movies,
right. No. Like I just kind of don't want to. I just don't care. Like
less nuanced pedophilia.
Right. It's just kind of a strange thing. I mean, I just, I don't really like making these distinctions. I am hugely against legalizing drugs, and I really do not care about like libertarian arguments about how inefficient the drug war is or something. Like you should not use heroin. And
pro drug war.
What about cocaine?
Let's go.
I'll make no comment.
I hope I don't.
There's some drugs that are cool. Okay.
I was going to ask your opinion on the drug thing, because that's interesting. Because my opposition to the gay thing is because, like, I think like of life as like the ability of, like, long-term survival of the sperm to reproduce. But like you're against the drug thing because it causes harm to people. Couldn't you argue that, like, being homosexual or potentially, being transgender, harms yourself, and you shouldn't allow people to harm themselves?
Well, if you want me to go there, I will. I mean, there's weird things. They're kind of like unintended consequences, I could say. But being that I am a Freudian, I could say that people are acting out a unconscious desire. So let's look at like gay liberation. And let's also stipulate, for the sake of argument, that there is some sort of genetic component to being homosexual. It doesn't, I doubt we would ever find a gay gene or something like that. But let's stipulate, and again, other people have made a counter argument that it is environmental, but for the sake of argument, we're stipulating that there's a genetic factor to homosexuality. One of the ironies of gay liberation is that you are going to weed out whatever genetic factors there are to homosexuality pretty ruthlessly. Because previously, people, if you're inclined to homosexuality, through social pressure, you would marry and likely reproduce. And, homosexuality, it crops up throughout time in various different, manifestations. So it's obviously been around. It hasn't been removed from the gene pool in the way that some kind of immediately horrible, heritable disease would be. And, look, what is the ultimate outcome of gender therapy. There is no way that this is just reversible and harmless. I mean, there is, I hear these arguments. I'm sorry, I don't need to hear these arguments. There is no way that blocking puberty at age 12 or something isn't going to have some sort of effect, in unintended or otherwise. And going through the process of gender transition invariably leads to sterilization. So, I mean, I think you guys can understand where I'm going with this. Like, there is a kind of like ruthless culling quality to advancing the transsexual, therapy. And it's a real serious irony to all of this kind of thing. And I've talked about this. It's kind of like I put on my ruthless Darwinian hat, but it's a very real thing. And so you kind of, I don't know, have to wonder at some level. I don't think anyone is consciously doing this, but they might be kind of unconsciously doing it. Another factor might even be, I'm just kind of like on a gut level against drug legalization, but like, there are some people who are just have addictive personalities who are weak-minded. They're going to go straight to heroin, and heroin is not a very good thing for, reproducing and being a successful organism. So there it is.
What's the main argument against drug use from your perspective?
It's just gross, and I dislike people who use drugs. Like
it destroys culture.
It's just
I was gonna say,
like pot sucks. I mean, like
human harm, right? Human harm.
Let's go.
Well, it just does. It's just such a dumbass drug. It's like a drug for hippies and leftists. It doesn't even inspire great art. It inspires you to just like sit on the couch and
well, some
Cheetos.
People say like, man, it inspires the best music and movies. And...
Oh my God, Grateful Dead, give me a fucking break. Inspires the worst music. Cocaine, on the other hand, I'll remain silent on that issue.
You're ambivalent.
So on the whole transgender thing, I think it's okay. The girl who was the flower girl in my wedding, she was adorable. Now likes to be called Eric. So that was tough. But it kind of lesser known thing is that a lot of gays are really, really not supportive of the whole trans thing. Because I think a lot of gays feel like, okay, so we got to this point now where like things were cool. You even had red states voting for, legalizing same-sex marriage. And then all of a sudden the trans thing like explodes. And I'm sorry, but I don't, and I will preface this with saying there are people I care about who are trans and have all sorts of respect and love for them. But I think it's a trend right now. Like, it seems very much like a trend right now, because you can see a group of friends that one decides they're trans, and then in no time, another one's like, oh yeah, me too. And then, oh yeah, me too.
There's no question there's a social contagion element to this. I mean, there is just simply no question. And one of the interesting things about this, just to jump in and I'll give you back the mic, is that men on the whole are more perverted than women. So men are more interested in fetishism. There are more homosexual men than there are lesbian women. I actually think I did these things when I was working with Ed Dudden. I was editing these. I added in a lot of stuff, but I suggested this, and he agreed to it, so it stayed in the book. But I wonder the degree to which male homosexuality and female sapphic relationships, they're actually separate phenomena. And in the sense that we kind of lump them together, it's like, oh, well, you're gay, so you married a man, and you're a lesbian, so you married a woman. But they don't necessarily, like, they're very different. There are many more male homosexuals than there are female lesbians.
Oh
And
yeah.
the other asymmetry is that women are more sexually fluid. Like, women are more likely to, as the stereotype goes, oh, I did this in college or whatever. And men are not like that. So there are very strong asymmetries to these things. And I wonder whether they are separate phenomena and they're just kind of lumped together as one thing. But I guess what I was getting at is one of the interesting things with social contagion is that what we see now is that more young girls are becoming transgendered than young boys are.
Yeah.
And that goes against, like, it goes against the basic fact, which are men are more perverted than women. So it's just a weird thing, and it does strongly suggest that, like, there's a contagion factor, and it's tough being a girl. I mean, you go through puberty, and also, like, men will start looking at you. You'll start going through puberty, and you'll get, you're 15, let's say, and you'll start getting stares, and that's that's something that I, as a man, never really experienced. I don't know, many women were ogling me. I mean, of course, in my case, that would happen all the time. You know what I mean? It's a different. I'm sure it is traumatic. Like, it's something that is scary, and there may be one way that they're reacting to that fact of life is that they're choosing to become a man. I don't know, but there's clearly, like, a social contagion factor going on.
Well, yeah.
Why don't you finish up, Polly, and then I'll let Xbox jump in again.
I think with girls, it's also a matter of seeing, because you see a lot of, sorry to sound cliche, but you see a lot of girls who are doing this now have, come from, say, a broken home or some sort of abuse, and taking on the male persona in ways I think makes them feel safe. That's obviously not all. I'm not trans. I don't know how these people feel, but yeah, the gays are not all on board with that. You will actually hear some of the worst trans bashing from gays. Well, and for one, I think trans, they are looped together. You have the whole LGBT, whatever letter of the alphabet thing going on, and trans feel like, they are comfortable with the gay community, and a lot of times the gay community can be like, okay, no, like, I'm not into that, and you seem to think because I'm gay, like, I'm going to be into you. I think one of the problems with the backlash to the trans thing, and honestly, I can be ultra conservative about it. Like, I'm not a trans hater by any means, but it's the fact that, I'm someone who's like, God doesn't make mistakes. So as far as gays go, I'm like, okay, well, God doesn't make mistakes. Trans kind of, it's a outright implication that, well, God got it wrong, and I was actually supposed to be this. And I think that a lot of times, you will see, I read this thing once where this kid was only like 7 years old and it was male to female, had already, like, testified before state legislatures on the trans issue so many times on their own, behalf. And I'm sorry, but I think that's a form of child abuse. And I'm sorry to sound harsh saying that, but as parents, you kind of have a responsibility to.
Well, she kind of, like, hit on a point that I was trying to make before, and I don't mean to interrupt again, but, like, she said that, like, God doesn't make mistakes. And what I was getting at, like, with either the Democratic Party supporting, LGBTQ, or the Republican Party attacking it via grooming, the end result is kind of like, a lower birth rate, just looking at it from above, in my opinion. So like when you talk about like the child issue, like if God didn't make mistakes, like, why would he make children be able to breed if you believe that? Like they shouldn't breed. You know what I mean? It's like you're trying to outlogic God with laws almost with these, anti-grooming statutory, rape laws.
But
I don't want to talk about this. Like,
yeah. I'm just going to mute you there. Yeah. I mean, it just doesn't. It's not the same thing as someone who happens to be infertile. Okay,
Well,
I'll go to Xbox, and then. Do you want to finish your thought there, Paulie, and then I'll go to Xbox.
Well, just related to all of this, I saw this morning that I don't know if anyone else has seen this, but there's a bill that's being brought before the California legislature, I think as of today, that in child custody cases, they want to make it so if there's one parent who is not gender affirming, that kid does not have to live with that parent. So basically, if your 10-year-old is going through a hard time and is like, no, really, I'm a he, and you're not jumping on that bandwagon and signing him up for hormone treatment, you can have custody taken from you. And I just think that's, things like that is irresponsible and ridiculous. And I think the more it's pushed like that, the more backlash you're going to see. And I think that's one of the reasons that, like you said, I totally agree with you. I think we are going to see some violent backlash in the next couple of years, but it's how aggressively all of this stuff is being pushed.
Yeah.
So,
all right. So I'll do Xbox, and then Arian chat, and then obvious.
Yeah. So I just wanted to comment on something you were just discussing, Richard. So as someone who spends a lot of time thinking about sexual deviancy, I think that as far as like,
well, you're in the pews, yeah.
Yeah, this is a Catholic thing. Some of you wouldn't get it. As far as the rates of perversion go, I think it's important to recognize, not only that male and female homosexuality are different, but that male and female heterosexuality are different phenomena as well. The kinds of the teleology and the psychology of sexual attraction is very different from heterosexual men and women. So the kinds of deviant expressions that they take are also going to be different. So like, men are likelier to have paraphilias, like fixations on objects or particular body parts or whatever. Women are much likelier to have violent or sadomasochistic fantasies than men. So the kind of like the nature of these sexual deviant fixations are going to be different for men and women. And the second thing is, like you were saying about homosexuality, if we think that homosexuality is not exclusively the result of genetic inborn predispositions, which of course might play a role, but if we don't think that they're the result of formative life experiences, it's probably the case that the experiences that produce lesbianism and that produce male homosexuals are going to be different. So my pet theory is that basically all women are bisexual, situationally sapphic, I guess. But that women women who are lesbians, who are exclusively same-sex attracted, tend to have some kind of impediment to forming emotional bonds with men or for trusting men. Either a negative experience with men, some kind of childhood sexual trauma or early adult sexual trauma, or lack of attention with men. They're not properly sexually socialized or something like that. Because men are very different. So it's not.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think Ed Dudden would back this up, and this is my kind of instinct on this as well. Ed Dudden suggested, it's not quite a satisfying explanation, but that due to the reality of polygamy in human history, that you would have, the big man with a number of different wives. The wives would kind of pair bond or have sapphic experiences while they were, within the household of the big man, basically. Probably not a full explanation, but it seems to ring true.
That seems plausible to me. I mean, I thought a bit about this from the metaphysics of human sexual desire.
Is that what you call it?
Yeah. That's what the research is called. I have my own theories about why this is, but it does seem to me even from just kind of like a natural law perspective, there's something much more disordered about male homosexuality, about like the act of sodomy, than there is about female homosexuality. And the culture at large, at least until very recently, would have recognized that fact, that the girls go through a phase in college. Men sodomizing one another is something that's, you know, like considered horrific.
It's just not cool.
Yeah. It's not quite as funny in a kid's film or something, or in a, you know, I don't know, American Pie or whatever those movies are called. So it's not quite played for laughs. I think part of it is just that, like, you know, kind of the metaphysics, the idea is that, like, well, like the female form is kind of the proper object of sexual desire, that like even women, so far as women are heterosexual, like there's something kind of narcissistic about the nature of female sexual desire. Like the woman, what's the phrase? Like the man watches, the woman watches herself be watched, or something like that. I'm forgetting the exact quote. So there's something about like the woman desires to be desired by an attractive man. It's not like the desire,
and the man is almost relevant. Like pure desire. Like one thing that's interesting, and I've done a lot of research on this matter, metaphysical and otherwise. But in pornography, very often.
sorry. That was a good transition. So, I'm sorry.
In pornography, the camera will focus on the female body, and oftentimes the male will have his like head out of the frame, like it will be like a torso. So I think in this way, like the male is this desiring force, and the female is the object of desire. And you can even see this, like men. I mean, like female magazines have pretty women on the covers, and again, we're like well past the age of magazines, but if you guys can remember. But then, like the Lad Mad, like Maxim, these magazines probably don't even exist anymore. I'm just going back to my youth, but like they'll have a hot female on the cover. So it's like everyone desires the female, even the women. You know, so like Elle magazine will have a beautiful woman, and then Maxim will also have a beautiful woman. I guess you could say that like Sports Illustrated is homoerotic or something, but I kind of don't think that's the case. I think that's a bit much. But yes, I think men, it's like we're not even an object that desires. We're desire itself, and then a woman is the object of desire. Woman, in a way, doesn't desire. She is desired.
Right. So like there's something about female homosexuality. The woman has like the appropriate object of desire, which is like herself, but it's not expressed in the appropriate way. The appropriate way is that the man serves to kind of like mediate her. She feels attractive for the man, and that kind of like confirms her role, which is why, I mean, that's the reason why, you know, in pornography, like, you know, the man, as you say, is like cut out of the scene, basically. There's the term in 1920s Germany about Neue Sachlichkeit, objectivity, right? Or it's like or kind of, you know, the subject is kind of absent from the scene. It just presents the object itself. Whereas like women like romance novels, where they imagine themselves in this complex scene where their relation to themselves or their way of thinking about themselves is attractive, is mediated by some character who sees them. And like in female homosexuality, in lesbianism, the woman has the appropriate object, except it's no longer herself. It's the female form in someone else. Whereas in male homosexuality, they get the object wrong. They focus on another man. And like, that's why I think, I mean, there are probably a number of reasons, but like fundamentally, I think that's why it's so disordered and disturbing, difficult to understand. Whereas most women can kind of, they get it, like why women find other women hot.
Yes.
Yeah,
more research needs to be done, I think, is the main conclusion that I've reached. So, Ari and Chad, you can...
Yes, I'll happily take the baton of the lesbian sex topic. I am born for this, in a way.
The philosophical topic.
Say what now? Oh, yeah, of course.
The academic lecture. Yes, go ahead.
I was going to backtrack halfway.
The Straussian
I was going to backtrack halfway. I think the schism that... conservative guy was speaking about, I think that's probably emerged because of the you know, you look at the course, the past sort of 70 years of social radicalism of the left. I mean, they basically started out, and this is probably because of themselves being very pragmatic in the original sense. They were quasi-essentialists. I mean, basically typified by, what is it, the Lady Gaga song "Born This Way," and so that actually it has been a very powerful tool against Christian conservatism to say, actually, there is an essentialism or a genetic predisposition. You're basically, you know, you discriminate against somebody as though they are a shorter person, you know. And this schism is basically brought about because that sort of, you know, older school part of that is sort of being put out to pasture, and it's basically retired or about to keel over, and sort of like the fruits of, you know, the sort of originator of, you know, someone like Judith Butler, you know, the original conceiving of gender as a sort of you know, immaculately conceived phenomena which is not anything to do with the material world and not born out of sex itself. I mean, this is sort of the ultimate conclusion of that original abstraction. So I think that's probably the reason why you have, as you say, like lots of gays and lesbians sort of feel like they're not on the same, you know, they're not really aiming for the same thing in their activism when they're with, you know, like that, whatever his or her name was that had her tits out of the White House. Like, that's just not something that they're largely on board with. But I think that's largely the schism. But on the more...
Well, like Judith Butler, yeah, I mean, she, in Gender Trouble, which is the book that I've read of hers, and I think I'm not sure I want to read more of her. Gosh, the writing style is like translated from the original, you know, 19th century German or something. Very cumbersome. But she was basically, you know, she accepted. I mean, that book was written in like 1991 or something. It's quite old at this point. But like, she accepted the whole sex gender divide, which, you know, both of those words mean the same thing, like etymologically speaking. But, you know, I'll grant a distinction that should be made. So sex is like chromosomes, genitalia, secondary sexual characteristics, etc. And then gender is informed by culture. And this is where, to go off on a little aside here, I think there is something just kind of like actually retarded and frustrating about like the Walsh documentary, What is a Woman? Because he's so like either like acting in bad faith or so dense that he won't even grant them that distinction. He'll be just like, oh yeah, you know, woman. Yeah, we know what a woman is, right? Well, look, a woman in the Middle Ages and a woman in ancient Egypt and a woman in 21st century America, like, yes, they all have the same chromosome structure, but like, their femininity is clearly being articulated in very different ways. And if we have a historical consciousness, then we can kind of look at that and examine it and say, like, what it meant to be a woman in medieval Europe is really different than what it means to be a woman in 21st century Nebraska. I mean, it's just such a kind of like, it's not that big of a deal to grant them that, from my perspective. It's just like they're being like needlessly obstinate, and it's just very frustrating. I could not watch that whole documentary. I watched like 20 minutes of it, but that was the impression I got, and I just kind of turned it off because it's like, look, we can talk about this subject, but you have to like grant them something. Like, they're not just, it's not all gobbledygook. Like Judith Butler's Gender Trouble, like it's an argument, you know. Anyway, she was already past the whole gender sex distinction, and she was kind of pushing even further. So she would be opposed to like a Lady Gaga Born This Way anthem, and she liked the idea of transgenderism or drag queens or whatever because they were kind of like questioning all of that because, like I could go to the passage itself, but like the drag queen is telling you that he is a woman, but while doing that, he's also telling you that he's a man dressed up as a woman. And he's kind of like, you're questioning the notion of an inner essence and an outer shell. What's superficial is as Oscar Wilde said, is his superficiality his depth? Like when he dresses up as a drag queen and performs, is he actually telling you that his inner essence is female? And so she liked the idea of this parodic or a parody of gender itself. Like she was pushing the limits. And I do think that there's a quality to that with transgenderism where there is a kind of like, it's kind of weird because I think Americans can't accept this because we're so bourgeois, like if you noticed that that transsexual woman who bared her breast at the White House, like she got denounced by Joe Biden. They're like, that bitch is banned. You can't do that.
Did he really?
But yeah, she
Oh, wow.
she is banned from the White House. So what it was is that they, that whole thing was kind of a bacchanal on some level. They're flying the flag. People are saying love is love, but it's a middle class bacchanal. Like it's one without actual sex. Like the Dionysian force in the ancient world, if you read like Euripides and so on, like it's a dangerous force. Like you might get laid, but you also might be torn to pieces or die or it's like a danger that enters society, but a kind of intoxicating or alluring danger. And I think Americans are so middle class that we do engage in this like heterosexualization of homosexuals where we're like, okay, so you were born this way and you can now get married. So congratulations, Tim and Jerry, you guys can have a mortgage. It's like we, the whole like what makes homosexuality interesting, you could say, is that it is a threat to the system. It's like it's kind of something that damages heteronormity, which I think is also a concept, and a real thing. It's not just some like, oh, these big words that academics use, like heteronormity. Yeah, we live in a heteronormative society where Cinderella marries a prince. I mean that is promoted as an ideal, and homosexuality is like this dangerous Dionysian force that enters. But with Americans, we can't think in that way. So we turn everything into this like bourgeoisification. So we're like, oh, you're a transsexual. That means that you can, go to these bathrooms or enter the army and fight as a woman you can now have a mortgage too. You can get a job and get healthcare benefits as a female, blah, blah. We have this like bourgeois, just like thoroughly kind of sexless and boring bourgeois concept. And so we like neutralize the Dionysian force and turn it into something middle class. And so, at this point, like, now that we're post gay marriage, like are gays really that threatening? Like the gay guy at your office, like in the other cubicle, like, is he really like a follower of Dionysus or like, or is he just kind of like gay in the 90s sense of the term? I think it's almost more of the latter. Like this Americanism like neutralizes these dangerous forces. I need to write an essay on this, or maybe you guys would advise me not to, but I think that's the way that I would describe it. I think it's actually kind of an interesting phenomenon.
Would you have to read more Judith Butler to do so?
I read it in grad school, and I have good marginalia and notes, so I just kind of go back to that.
Would you ever recommend like an undergraduate doing that? Like, is there any
reading Gender Trouble by Judith Butler? Yeah. I mean, I'm not terribly interested in this subject, so I'm kind of lazy. So you just read like you just read the big books. It's like you just go and read like Act 5 of Hamlet and then claim you've read all of Shakespeare. I mean, I would not recommend that in Shakespeare. You should read like The Winter's Tale and all of that great stuff that is forgotten. But when it comes to gender theory, yeah, you just read that book, and that's like all you need to do. And then you can pretend that you've read the whole literature.
Nice.
But the problem is with Walsh is that he hasn't even fucking read that book. So it's like, come on, man.
I agree. I agree with what you're saying about it. I think though, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, I was the same. Like watching him debate that, obviously a homosexual gender studies professor in his office was kind of like watching two retards fight, and one of the most painful experiences in my past little bit. But I mean, like,
if you couldn't bet on the outcome, then it becomes kind of boring.
Yeah,
sorry, that was a really cruel.
But
joke.
the part of the, I mean, I'm not just going to blame him because he is stupid and he's conservative, so it's kind of like whinging that the sky is blue. But I think as well, like, there are many, to just bring out a trope, there are many sort of mid-wit leftists who, I mean, and I would probably put that professor, the sort of little guy with the glasses who's got like a 115 IQ, like they do get themselves in horrible tangles because their entire ideology is just language games. I mean, there are such contradictions which are just commonplace, like, if sexual organs truly have no bearing on gender, then why is having your penis cut off called gender-affirming surgery? Surely, whether you retain a penis or you dismember it has no bearing on it being there or not. And so I think ultimately, I get what you're saying. Like, yes, the hottie who I just walked past a few minutes ago probably, didn't have a shaved puss 1,500 years ago. But I don't think that deconstructs femininity and womanhood the same way that Butler does. I mean, and she leverages.
Totally. Butler acknowledges that. Butler is expressing that fact. She's saying that, like, as sexual politics evolves, we're retreating to a kind of essentialism, and so. The new phase of sexual politics, it's not about like we are special as women. It's about like a drag queen parroting the whole idea. I mean, you could even imagine like a biological woman performing as a drag queen. That's like easy to imagine. I'm sure it's happened. So it's this like double, triple move of, who am I really? Am I claiming that my essence is male and that men like to dress up like women to be funny? So I'm saying this, I'm like giving you this like weird kind of thing. The other thing that I would say is that, like, I get kind of tired of the discourse on transsexuals because it is all about this bourgeoisification. Like, without supporting them, I would have more respect for them if they actually did describe it in a kind of Dionysian way. Like when they say things like, "Oh, we're doing this for the mental health of someone," or so that she can feel affirmed and whatever. It's like, I would have more respect for you if you were like going out into Central Park and engaging in crazed, drunken orgies. Because at that point, what you're doing is kind of like actually radical and dangerous. If you're just like affirming people so they can become like more, like just typical Americans and, just be lame and boring and mid-witted and, whatever, like there's just something kind of like, I can't really respect that, to be honest. Whereas like if you go to the ancient world, the spirit of Dionysus, which was rising, I mean, it was, they performed all those great, Oedipus and Prometheus and all this kind of stuff. I mean, these were performed at the temple of Dionysus, and they were willing to kind of engage in something that was terrifying, and so they were willing to kind of like open up things that questioned society in a real way, or got at a tragic impasse in society with like Antigone or something like that. And when Americans pick up this stuff, it's like, oh, like, Ted and Jim can now have a mortgage, and what it's like, this is just kind of lame. Like it's an affront to Dionysus.
Yeah,
That's
I
what I'm
agree with
saying.
that. But I mean, like, well, I agree with what you're saying, because that is the modern cultural paradigm as being, liberal humanism. Like they
Yeah,
cannot sort of
boring.
assert themselves by saying, "Let's fucking go, bitches!" Like orgy at 2 a.m. Like that is
Yeah,
just not a good PR statement. Like, yeah,
in the
yeah,
forest,
yeah,
yeah, and we'll worship
mm,
some mystery
yeah.
cult that no one understands. Like if someone had died at the White House this past weekend, I would have had more respect for them. Sorry, I'm being outrageous here, but I'm being outrageous to make a point. They're like the dominant form of like Americanism is this bourgeoisification of everything. There's no social force that we can't ruin.
That's very Nietzschean.
Oh yeah, totally. I remember when I was an undergraduate, and there was this. This makes me sound like a shrill atheist, but I think you guys will understand where I'm coming from. So there was this. It was this undergraduate who's writing an essay, and she was reading it out loud to like her colleague, and it was this like very predictable, like we shouldn't. She was making almost like feminist arguments for fundamentalist Christianity. So it was like women must all be respected, and thus, we need to ban horror movies, and because that shows like women getting knifed to death, and this will lead to bad social outcomes, and we should have like wholesome movies because that's better for women. I was just like chafing in my chair listening to this, and I was like, I have a cool idea for a film, and it's about a young man who goes mad, but he might be feigning his madness, and his father was murdered by his own brother in order to take over everything. But it gets even worse because he's secretly in love with his mother, and he's just filled with unholy passion for his mother. And then at the end, they all die in what seems like a mutual suicide. And she was like, that is just terrible. I was like, all right, man. All right, babe. That's the plot of Hamlet. Oh, gotcha. So, like, obviously I was being a bit of a fedora wearing atheist, but I think you kind of see my point. Like, Hamlet, it's not just about great poetry. Like, it's about exposing on stage something that is truly traumatic and tragic and horrible, and kind of makes you kind of, I don't know, question things like, oh my God, Hamlet really is in love with his mom. That's what's great about it. On some, like, you can't separate great poetry from the horror in a way that Shakespeare is presenting on stage. And it's like the American tendency towards all this stuff is to turn everything into like some like life, life affirming in a really bad way. Just some kind of like bourgeois, happy, contentment affirming, lame, midwit, gay in the 90 cents of the word nonsense. And I just hate it. I just instinctively hate that. I want to go see like fucking Sophocles. I don't want some like woman affirming, melodrama in which she gets a promotion at her job or something. Get fucked.
Did you present the Hamlet summary to a class?
No, I did it just in the computer lab. She was like so proud of her dumb little essay that she was reading it aloud. But I totally nailed her because I like set it up. It was almost like, I think a lot of you guys noticed like where I was going when I was going through the thing. And she was like, that is just disgusting.
Worth remembering, American Psycho is directed by a woman.
Yeah.
True, yeah.
It's a great film.
Well, sorry. I think you need to be careful about what you're saying, Richard. because if you read sort of like quote unquote the most radical queer theorists, they went against gay marriage precisely because it sort of normalizes them,
Right.
and not only that, but there's this famous queer theorist from Spain, whatever his name is, like Paul Preciado or something, and he sort of embraces some sort of Dionysian spirit in his hair critique of the what he calls the pharmacopornographical regime, and yeah.
Look, I don't endorse them, but I have more respect for a radical like that than the kind of middle class Americanism that seems to have triumphed. Like Andrew Sullivan won the homosexual battle. You know, Andrew Sullivan described himself as a Catholic conservative, and he promoted gay marriage. And what was his book title? Like Almost Normal or something like that. There's just something, you know. And again, I go back where we were 2 hours ago. I kind of like Andrew Sullivan. He seems like a cool guy. I don't really have anything against him. It's just like there's something just so fundamentally lame about that I just don't really respect it. It's an end of history situation. It kind of imagines a point where there's no real danger or problem in society, and everything has been, you know, like enveloped in the bourgeois regime. Obvious, do you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, top of the morning to you, Richard.
Yeah. You got some shrimp on the Barbie there?
Yeah, certainly do. It's just smoking away in the backyard.
Well, it's probably 9 a.m., so you're already chugging a Foster's, I presume.
Yeah, Foster's, Australian for beer. Yes, how'd you know?
Yeah. Well, it's what we know. It's 9 a.m. somewhere.
Yeah, it's always 9 a.m. somewhere. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So what kind of beer do you drink, Richard? Just out of interest.
Well, I'm not a big beer drinker, but particularly in the summer when it's hot outside, I kind of like beer. You know, I like a good Mexican beer, and I also, when I studied German, I really enjoyed drinking Weissbier, which is a wheat beer. So you can't get. I mean, I was very young and had no money. I was drinking Paulaner a lot, but they have this. What did I get here? Leinenkugel Summer Shandy. It's pretty good. It kind of reminds. It's a Weissbier. It kind of reminds me of that good Weissbier you can get in Bavaria, the lemon or an orange.
You think of Radler?
Yeah, Radler. That's pretty good. That's like lemonade beer.
Interesting.
Yeah, I like.
I'm sure you can get that at a number of places.
You can get that at a number of places. Yes.
Yeah.
You know, Mexican beer. That's one of Mexico's many gifts to cuisine. I think is Mexican beer. I like that.
Yeah, that's good.
But I'm not a big beer drinker. You know, in the winter, if I drink a beer, I like need to go take a nap or something. I just, you know, kind of slows you down.
Yeah, you have to do a space about your spirit drinking sometime.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah. All right. Back to the thing at hand, I guess. JF did a retweet of a. I forget this right. It was a woman who had transitioned into a man. I'm not sure if you saw it, but they transitioned into a man, and then they were complaining incessantly about. They were crying. Actually, they were crying just at how the way society treated that person as a man. Like she was listing like how men are treated in public. Like,
well, I think I saw that. I think I might have retweeted it myself. I thought it was pretty profound. I think that it wasn't even so much the way society treats everyone, but the way that life is as a man. You kind of have fewer friends, and everyone's cold, and I thought it was actually like a really honest statement by that TikToker.
Yeah,
It's
which is
very, very, very true in many ways.
yeah. I don't know what these women think they're going to end up as, or what societal expectations they have when going into it. But it's to kind of walk in our shoes type of thing. It's not all fun and rainbows being part of patriarchy, as you know.
No.
So it's quite sad. But just in regards generally with this gay transsexual thing, it's within living memory that all this stuff was banned. Like literally sodomy laws, homosexuality was banned. Like if you were homosexual in the UK, they were chemically castrated. Like I think the guy who invented the first computers in the 1940s, Turing, he was chemically castrated because he was a homosexual, which is kind of ironic the way transsexuals go self-castrating, I guess. But it's something that it's not that far away in our distant past that this conversation wouldn't be happening. Like maybe some academic back room or something like that, it might have been happening, but at Kinsey or something like that. But yeah, society was pretty harsh on this stuff. Not until fairly recently, like only in the 1970s, that it become even notional. The notion of it became acceptable. So the pendulum could swing back pretty quickly.
Well, yeah, it definitely can swing back quickly, and I think it is. But also there's this kind of irony of the fact that transsexuals are now chemically castrating themselves. There's something odd about it. It's like that's constantly our response to this issue.
Yeah, it is. I guess you'd never interrupt people when they're making a mistake, especially if they're your enemy. But it'd be interesting to see the statistics on how many women try to transition into men and men who try to transition to women. That would get my scratching my head a bit. But in regards to the conversation you guys had,
again, much as there are, I looked at these statistics at one point, and I haven't in a little while. But as much like there are many more male homosexuals than there are lesbians, there are generally speaking more male transsexuals. However, what we see going on in high schools right now is major overrepresentation by young girls. So, which seems to suggest that there's something else going on here. Women are much more socially attuned, like they're more kind of like they find fashion trends, they'll hop on it sooner than a male would. They're just more social beings.
I believe Elon Musk's daughter from previous marriage, I think she's either transitioning or she's heavily into this type of stuff, which may be a bit of an explanation why he's gone, partial explanation of why he's flirting with the American rights so much. But
definitely.
You're not immune if you're an elite for this stuff. Like, just because you've got $1 billion or $1 billion in shares, I should say, you're not immune to all this stuff floating around in the media environment, and your children aren't either. So it's a tricky one. Yeah, but if it was up to me, it'd be banned.
I understand.
Banned in Australia.
Right.
Yeah.
You're talking about heterosexuality, because due to the fact that you're from Australia, you would ban heterosexuality in Australia because it's so out of place.
No, lady.
Yeah.
Poofs star Calais.
You're the outlier, obvious.
No. You guys, I'm not upside down. You guys are upside down.
Right.
Counterclockwise toilets.
Yeah, I'll flush it right now if you want me to, but no.
You celebrate
you guys
Christmas in midsummer. I mean, you guys have been subverting society since the beginning.
Hey, we're not the Irish.
Listen.
Oh, look at this deflection going on. No, just joking, of course.
God bless. God bless.
All right. Let me do this. I'm gonna end the space, but just because I'm a masochist, I'm gonna bring Hannah back up. I want to just see what kind of. Okay, Hannah, this is the challenge. All right. You've got the platform. Make a point. Ready, set, go.
Headlining speaker.
Unmute yourself. Hannah, you're live. Silence. She's now silent. Wow, so crazy. All right, guys. Oh, Patrick, yeah.
Well, I didn't want
to come and troll me.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to like talk about the gay LGBTQ thing and the birth rate thing and the hypocrisy of it both. But like, I was gonna pick your brain on the economic issue we were talking about last night, but that's too long. Like, just real quick.
Yeah, that's too long.
The Ukraine Russia war thing. I want to get your opinion on it because like a lot of like like the Nick Fuentes types, will say like they're with Russia because they think like Ukraine's controlled by Jews. Charles said the opposite, and you know what I mean.
Right.
Like,
look.
It's late, man.
Yeah, it's late. I'm not going to make a decision on like, is something controlled by Jews? I mean, you could probably make a strong argument about literally everything being controlled by Jews. So I'm not,
that was my like an opinion, by the way.
And I'm not just a reactionary person like that. This film was directed by a Jew, so it's not good or whatever. I'm tired of that. Okay, Patrick.
Sorry to bother you.
You can go for it, Patrick. Troll away.
No, I wasn't.
Oh,
the other Patrick.
Hey, I was just gonna say, just critique on your comments about the homo question. I was just gonna say that don't trivialize it in the sense of, I think it could be viewed as sort of a cornerstone of the establishment's belief system, homosexuality itself, and that to treat it like them, bourgeoising or trying to turn it, treat it in a bourgeois fashion. I would argue that they actually believe, like, sort of like Jesus is to Christians, homosexuality is to the establishment. That would actually be the argument I would make.
Do you guys ever time just think about having fun, or no?
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, very clear.
No, we're against fun.
Yeah, it's
fun
always
is banned in Australia.
You just think that, like, if you like someone else, it has to be politically motivated.
Well, it has nothing to do with that. I'm sure there's plenty of authentic homosexuals, but it'd be like if we had a foot fetish.
Authentic homosexuals.
What?
It's mostly authentic.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think Patrick. I mean, I don't want to speak for Patrick, God forbid, but I think that he believes that most all homosexuals are genuine about it. They're not faking it or making a political statement. But what he's saying is that there is a political, he's arguing that there is a political aspect to it, or like it's a centerpiece. Like it's not just some new thing that they've adopted. Like that homosexuality itself is symbolically even important for their ruling class.
But I think it's nothing. I don't think
better than the way I said
the homosexuals have anything to do with that.
Well, we're not talking about. He's talking about the ruling class. He's not talking about your average gay in Greenwich Village or whatever.
Yeah, they're not, dictating policy or anything. But obviously, with like the trans stuff, it comes from the top down. I don't think that someone just woke up and was like, hey, there's a bunch of these trans kids that, need their rights protected. So we need to do X, Y, and Z and make sure that it's in curriculums. I don't think it's that simple.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
I agree. I'm not sure there was like a popular demand for any of this thing before 2014 or something.
but
I mean,
you
it was
guys also
around.
realize that before, like, you even being gay wasn't a word for a long time.
Well, one thing I'd add to, and this
things
might sound kind of insane, but I would argue some of these people that follow that belief system, they sort of view heterosexuality as an original sin of some kind, where it's hard to put into words, but basically, like, man has abused women for thousands of years, and this is some kind of like sin that has to be corrected. I would argue that's part of it.
Yeah.
What about thousands of years ago when there's proof of homosexuality, though?
No, I'm sure there is.
Well, Hannah, you should read Michel Foucault, because he talks about this. It was homosexuality was understood as a behavior and not an identity. This actually gets back to the Judith Butler thing. So,
but we live in a society now that's based on identity, so it's not anyone's fault.
Well, I know that, but like we should at least be aware of that, if not question it. I mean, it's one thing to say I'm going to ban same-sex relations outside of marriage or something, and that you can find plenty of examples of that type of law. But it's something else in the 19th century to say, like, I'm a psychologist and I'm going to understand the origins and essence of the homosexual mind, because at that point you're creating homosexuality as an identity, and that is where we are. We
well,
definitely
the identity only
that.
comes from the backlash of it being something.
Well, but there's so many identities you could have. I mean, someone has to choose. We don't have a
identity
foot
comes
fetish
from
flag
someone
on the
pushing
White
back
House
on
or
someone.
something.
Well, but don't you think that's it's like a very negative way of describing an identity, and so
no, it's not negative. It's just truth.
Well, so there's no African American identity outside of oppression.
I mean, that's kind of the basis of my point in the original sense.
In a weird way, we whites invented rap music, and that seems to be a logical
implication. Let's not get silly.
Well,
but that is what you're saying.
Does the oppressor have an identity?
The oppressor makes the identity.
So the oppressor, like, everything flows from the oppressor.
Wow, very Nietzschean.
Yeah, I mean, you're like a Nietzschean white supremacist. I don't know if I want to ban you from this call or like
disavow.
Try to get your number. Sorry, Hannah, I'm like this. I'll take the logical implication of everything you say and take it to the I'll take it someplace you didn't know it was going to go.
I mean, the pure fact that we're talking about trans people is so boring, don't you think?
Well, the trans thing's kind of in a physical sense, the becoming.
Yeah, you were definitely overcoming the human race. That's definitely true.
I mean,
a Superman of some kind. Yeah.
You're taking the psychological over becoming and transforming it to the body, which is
no. I think that's seriously how they view it. I think they do.
I mean, honestly, it's a tragic kind of interpretation, but it is they are doing it.
Well, what's funny is you guys have never said like your main problem with any of this.
It's immoral.
Well,
it's immoral.
Don't say moral because
I haven't said that. I have examined all of this dispassionately, and I have not morally condemned anyone. But I do want to understand it. I don't think you can make a judgment about something until you really understand it. And I'm not in the business of like morally condemning people, I'm much more
Yeah,
interested
I'm
in
not
trying to
fucking
understand them.
a
Yeah.
politician that tries to ban abortion because they don't understand it. You know,
Right.
Well,
But what
it's
if they
equally as
did
retarded.
understand it and decided to ban it?
yeah, I think you can blame liberals for abortion.
Well,
getting
it goes
banned,
back
honestly.
to if your body is the only thing you have on this life.
That's
Well-
so small, though.
But it's not.
It's a society based
Is
identity.
your body your property?
Yes, I would say.
You're a Christian then, right?
Wow, we got a big echo here.
Sorry, you have this spiritualist thought that
He's in a church.
there's this property of your body, and there's that difference between your body and something else that generates that relationship of property.
What is the owner? Like, who owns your body? Like, what is the thing that owns your body? The soul?
Well, do you want to answer first?
No, I want you to answer. I don't believe in any of this stuff. But apparently you do. So I'm trying to interrogate. Like, I believe the ego is an illusion, but you apparently don't.
Well,
like, what owns your body?
The ego is. It might be an illusion, but it's the most powerful illusion there is.
I would agree with that.
I'm sure it's just a section of the brain that is slightly different than your reptile brain.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's the language.
Listen to what you just said.
Language function of your brain. I think that's the ego.
It's called human brain.
Right, but it's a part, and it might even be a recent part of the brain.
So if a woman wants to make out with a woman, and that's
awesome.
bisexual.
Let's talk more about this.
Yeah. And I agree with you. If a man makes out with a man, that is
gross.
Yeah, yucky, icky vibes. I'm telling my mom.
Richard, what's your
We're
opinion
running
on
from the
Freud's
playground.
beliefs regarding that?
No, but like that's kind of like an interesting like point in this, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Richard, what do you think of Freud's interpretation of
Can we
homosexuality?
stop talking about fucking Freud?
I didn't know anyone else brought him up.
To represent Freud, so he believes that there is a kind of developmental stunted quality to homosexuality where, if I remember correctly, in the when you enter the world, your whole body is kind of sexualized in some way, like you're and then you'll move to a kind of anal stage of sexualization when you're going through potty training and all that kind of stuff. And you'll eventually kind of reach a mature genital based sexuality. I think there might be something to this. I mean, not with lesbianism, but like with male homosexuality,
there does seem to be correlations with certain things. Yes.
Yeah,
I agree.
The difference,
fixation on the anus. Yeah. And that's not.
I agree.
It's not an organ that's usually.
And they say this because if you have a certain amount of boys, like
there's no functionality.
No.
So you can't be trad and be like, oh, believing in this, like that there is a success, like that men can be born homosexual.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. Am I right on that?
Well, it depends on what you mean by born. Maybe like, because, people imprint. So when someone's like 11 years old, if they, imprint on something like that.
Have we not all had the kid in fucking middle school that you knew was gay from the jump?
But he wasn't from the jump. But not from the jump.
But not from the jump.
Hannah, I think that there is likely a genetic component to homosexuality.
Me too.
But I'm not positive about that.
I actually think that's the most. That's the biggest thing that does that.
Come on.
I'm trying to find the words. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like,
I mean, I understand. I think that is most likely the case. That there's a
I
kind
do
of
too.
maybe an inclination that it's not like
Yes.
a 100%, but
Yes.
you're just inclined. And
Don't you guys think that it makes more sense that you were genetically inclined to homosexuality rather than your surroundings, like
Well, it'd have to
said,
be an evolutionary
Maybe
advantage.
if you read a lot of like Greek history books, maybe, but there's just no way.
I mean, I'm rewatching Game of Thrones, so maybe I'm in that sense.
I do think that there might be different forms of homosexuality, and that some of them could very well be the product of abuse and
Well,
a
and
kind
this
of
comes into the
thing. But
bisexuality of women, right? Women can make out with another woman, and it's not considered X, Y, and Z. It's just like that's what she did, and she can
Right.
marry a guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She's not gay. You know?
Yeah, the sexes are
For
not equal.
men, it's different.
Yeah, for men it's
Yeah.
like a fetish, but for women it's not.
If I see a guy make out with a guy, you're gay.
Yeah, definitely.
And I cannot explain that myself, but that's what it is to me.
Yeah, because we're different.
Yeah.
There's big.
It boils down to men and women are biologically different.
True.
That's it.
Real.
That's my sense.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, and all of this to me goes back down to the whole soul, theory that I think a lot of these people really believe in, like a soul, and that has something to do with it, in terms of your true self doesn't have a gender or whatever, kind of thing. I don't know where
it's so complicated, right?
I
like,
do
do
think
you believe
ridiculous.
that? Do you believe that your soul was male?
You think what? Or
do you believe that?
I mean,
whoa.
I don't
or
believe
all you
in
guys,
a soul.
do you believe that?
I don't believe that souls exist, but I do. No, there's no question that like who I am is related to my chromosome structure. Like there's just no question about it.
But your chromosome structure can be exactly the same as a homosexual's.
But what about the soul, though?
Yeah, okay. I'm a wizard. I don't know.
I mean, a lot of trans have this like Neoplatonist discourse
I'm
about
not this guy.
being like their soul is man and they're imprisoned in their women body and vice versa.
I totally
maybe it's
agree
a
with
simulation.
What do you say?
He's saying like Plato didn't exactly invent the idea of the soul, but he certainly developed it. And there is a, I mean, again, I think all of these things can kind of be true. There is a weird kind of Nietzschean quality to transsexuality.
Yes.
Although I say that as a Nietzschean, so I don't really buy it, and I don't really like it. But like you're overcoming.
So Nietzsche,
like material condition.
Okay, hold on.
Let me finish.
You
Hannah,
say you're a Nietzschean.
What is
your political or your? Are you a nihilist? Like what are you?
Hannah, we've been trying to figure this out for years.
That's way too.
He's a nihilist.
I'm a Bidenian nihilist.
I'm a nihilist. I said that at my sister's wedding speech.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's That I'm sure that really
Nietzsche was not a nihilist.
I think Alan Bloom wrote about this one time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a more plausible notion that there is this idea of a soul. Like it's, if you say that I am a man trapped in a woman's body or a woman trapped in a man's body, you are implying that there is some disembodied thing, a soul that is trapped somewhere. Yeah, I mean, I do think that it's.
You believe that?
It gels much more. I don't believe that. No, I don't believe that at all.
Aristotle would have believed that.
For sure.
Yeah. I think that transsexuals are
Can we say transgender?
I think there's some serious issue going on in social contagion. I do think that like the feeling of dysphoria is real. I don't think they're faking it.
But I think that the social lives we live is like putting that like in upper regards. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We all don't know who we are at some point.
But
I mean,
we also have
particularly
to
when
look
you're
at
going through
this.
We
puberty.
can get pretty close.
We also have to look at this. Like back in the day, like there wasn't as many gay people that anyone knew because it wasn't socially acceptable. So like
Right.
we have to understand in a historic context that things do change, right?
Yes.
It was always supposed to be a subculture. It was never supposed to be mainstream.
And I think the majority of smart homosexuals would agree with you. 100%.
Like they're riding a wave where it's been more popular than ever, and it's very unnatural to the history.
Well, it's unnatural for a politician to vote on someone's sexuality. You know what I mean?
Well, this gets back to what I was saying. Like, is there something good about oppression and and persecution? Like, is the fact that Tchaikovsky,
yes.
let's assume that Tchaikovsky was gay.
Well, hold on. We don't have to. The women's liberation, the women's right to vote. Yeah, that was something that was violent, that happened, and it ended in something positive and good.
Right. You now get to be cubicle dwelling, nihilist.
Oh,
and
shut up.
Have no lives and be unhappy.
Oh, because you never had to fight for it. We get it. Yeah.
And listen to bad music.
Yeah, and you never had to fight for the right to vote. Got it.
What I'm saying is, let's stipulate that Tchaikovsky was in fact a homosexual, and he had these desires that couldn't be expressed, and maybe they, in a way, made his music better.
I agree.
Precisely. I mean, I tweeted this out actually like a month ago or so.
Did you get a lot of heat for that?
No, I didn't tweet that out before. I think I might have said it before, but no,
I was
tweeted
like, oh
out
god,
this debate between a Wagnerian and a Verdian. It was kind of an argument of who's the greater composer, Wagner or Verdi, and I really appreciated the guy who was gay.
Did you like
by
a
the way.
poll?
No, they did a debate. It was hosted by
Stephen
Fry. Let Hannah stop interrupting. All right,
I'm a Leo. Sorry,
I'm gonna have to oppress you if you keep this up, and you'll be better for it.
Oh God, not that.
Very conservative.
But, so actually,
Go
it was
ahead,
funny.
please.
The two Wagnerians were both gay. Whatever this means, the Verdi aficionado was heterosexual. Anyway, the guy supporting Verdi made the argument that like Verdi was a good guy. Everyone liked him. He was nice. He was kind of a reasonable Italian nationalist. And the Wagnerian made a really good argument, which is like we should probably contemplate the fact that Wagner was a great composer precisely because he was so evil. Like he was such a massive jerk that he
100%.
Yeah, like he wasn't a great composer.
We have this fucking like
he was
random thing in our culture today that thinks that bad people or even bad characters cannot make good art. And that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life.
Maybe only bad people.
Maybe I would say maybe only bad people can make good shit.
Is that too cynical?
Well, but
no, it's not cynical.
And maybe this is a real big problem with like the Me Too movement and things like that, is that we're attacking all of these, egomaniacal asshole, people.
Well,
and what we're going to end up with
it's a gray area, it's an up and down, No one should be raped to have a movie role, but
right. But I think you're making a broader point, Richard.
Yeah, I'm no
like
Wagner
was a
I hear what you're saying.
Human being,
but horrible human beings,
like socially,
I don't
make
good
ways.
shit.
He was just terrible.
Yeah, like me.
Right. But like, is that
and like you?
Yeah, right. I'm kind of bad. I'll admit.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
No,
I'm kidding.
I embrace that fact. But it's like, yeah, we attack the egomaniacal, maniacal type people, and it's really a will to power of the weak and the sick and the boring and the unimpressive. Like they want to drag
Well, I
down.
think what you said about Me Too was not really much so about Me Too. It was about the fact that we have come as a culture to accept something that might not be tasteful or palatable to us, but makes good shit. And we can decipher what is the worst and the best between those. And it's a big fucked up thing that we're dealing with right now, you know? Like, people cannot even differentiate between bad characters and bad people.
All right, let's do this. I'm going to have to wrap this up, so we're just going to do a lightning round here. Mid Castizo.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes.
Hi. Well, hi from Germany, and I wanted to ask something because I see that there are a lot of self-proclaimed nihilists here.
Nihilists.
Well, Hannah described herself as a nihilist, but I was surprised by how often she uses the words good, bad, should be allowed, not be allowed, and I wanted what does that mean for a non-nihilist like me?
What do words like good and bad mean?
Yeah, you said for example, like
in the context of what?
You said, for example, you're a nihilist, and sometime later you said, like, bad people make good art, for example. It's something very trivial, and it was not the topic, like the goodness and the badness. But what is the badness of that person, and does that badness has anything to it, or it's just we agree all that this is bad, and it's just a constructed?
Well, what you just said. So we have in America, especially, a unfair dialogue about bad people making good art, and nihilism comes into play when you don't care to see or care to know what their like actual goal is.
Okay, well, that was one point, and another point that you were talking.
Don't you know about nihilism in Germany?
I'm not German, but
What are you?
I'm Peruvian. I'm studying. I came to study in Germany.
What did you study in Germany?
Molecular biology. But
okay, so you see the city of Germany, right?
The city of Germany. Okay, Hannah, you're gonna have to quiet down after that comment. Okay, okay, I can't pronounce your handle, but you have a Daniel Craig photo.
It's actually Kike Bra. It's not Kike Bra. I named it. Sorry about that.
There's a legend here.
Kike Bra is a player for the Red Sox.
Okay.
Wait, sir, how do you feel about nihilism in general?
Me? Are you asking me or Richard?
Richard.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a nihilist myself, actually.
That's super cool.
Okay.
It's kind of a doubt.
Okay, Kike, go.
Yeah.
Go. Me Castiza, I just got a question for you. What type of molecular biology are you studying? And what kind of field is it in?
Currently, I'm doing it's a master's degree, not a PhD. So it's not super into the weeds.
Yeah, we know what it is.
But currently, I'm in a lab that does translational epigenetics.
Oh, that's cool. If you're ever heading into
Translational
Alzheimer's,
genetics.
oh, sorry.
Yes, Anna.
Are you studying like mRNA vaccines?
There are some people in the same lab as me that are doing like RNA stuff. I'm currently not doing that.
Are you mapping DNA?
Pretty much. I mean, what?
Well, it's been mapped, so.
I'm just curious. Are you studying Auf Deutsch, or or is English being spoken in the classes?
It's mainly everybody speaks English. There are actually some people in the lab that cannot. I'd say the majority of people in the lab cannot speak German, and I feel bad for the Germans
Math and science are all the same language.
And I feel bad for the Germans because they finance with their taxes people to live here. And I have some people who have tenured professors who have been here for like 15 years, 20 years, and they don't speak a word of German.
That's fucked up.
Yeah, I feel bad that's something that I constantly talk about with my German friends, is that I may come from.
Guess what? Everyone here at Penn, they're all fucking from Korea or China.
It happens.
God. Okay. All right, Jason. You get to speak, and then I'm gonna wrap it up.
Wunderbar. So let's
Wunderbar.
Yeah. Let's talk about atomic structure. Let's talk about.
Who's gonna see Oppenheimer?
No, let's talk about the atom bomb. So the atom bomb was hydrogen,
God,
right?
good.
And so, how did the atom bomb, the hydrogen bomb, become so destructive? What was the encasement? Was it thorium or plutonium?
Plutonium.
Is this a metaphor
No,
for
I just
something,
want
or
to know if
what
since
point
we're
are you
all
making?
smart here. Was it
Thorium
thorium
and
or
Are you just
electron.
totally drunk?
Yielded that double the yield of a hydrogen reaction?
Sure, no one knows to tell him Ulam
I
design.
want to know who's the smartest one
electrons.
here. Could you tell me?
Me.
No one can answer that.
Plutonium.
Richard
It was
Spencer.
thorium and plutonium. It's both.
That is not even a
How's
no.
he trying to trick us right
It was
now?
a trick question. Yes, it's both thorium
Yeah,
and plutonium. The yield from a hydrogen reaction in the atom bomb was.
All right. We have absolutely descended into utter nonsense at this point.
Yeah, it's a true
Guys,
story.
thanks for joining
That's
me.
how the
And
big boy and
I
the
will
small
talk to you
man.
guys soon. All right.
Hey, take it easy, Richard.
Ciao. Tschüss.
Let's go.
Thanks.
Good luck.